Part 1. The Inciting Incident. This ghetto troublemaker doesn't deserve to fly on our airline. Blood trickled down Olivia Jackson's wrist as two uniformed officers dragged her through the crowded terminal of Atlanta International Airport. Their grip tightened with each of her words, metal handcuffs cutting deeper into her dark skin. All around them, passengers froze in their tracks. Phones rose in unison, dozens of strangers recording the scene in stunned silence. A 17-year-old black girl in handcuffs, her wrist bleeding, yet her eyes remained calm, her dignity somehow intact despite the humiliation. "That's her," announced Rebecca Morrison, a blonde woman in her mid-30s wearing a crisp Skyway Airlines uniform. She stood behind the officers with arms crossed, a satisfied smirk playing across her lips. She was being aggressive on board. We had no choice. Aggressive. That single word echoed through the terminal like a slap. It was the word that had been used for generations to justify cruelty against people who had done nothing wrong except exist while black. Olivia's voice stayed steady, cutting through the chaos. "I have a valid ticket. I was seated quietly. I did nothing wrong." Each word was measured, controlled, even as the officers yanked her forward. The pristine white sleeve of her carefully ironed blouse was now stained crimson where the metal had broken skin. 4:13 p.m. Terminal B buzzed with horrified whispers. The harsh fluorescent lights cast everything in stark relief: the silver handcuffs, the crimson blood, the gleaming police badges, and the dozens of phone screens capturing every moment. What none of those recording bystanders could possibly know was that this moment, this public humiliation captured on dozens of phones, would soon flip the entire aviation industry upside down, because the teenager they were dragging through that terminal wasn't just anyone. She was the daughter of Marcus Jackson, founder and CEO of Skyway Airlines, the very airline whose staff initiated the incident. A middle-aged woman in a business suit whispered to her companion, "This is disgusting. What did that poor girl do?" "Nothing," replied an elderly man who had witnessed everything. "She was just sitting there when they accused her of stealing a laptop. I saw the whole thing," and nodded a college student, phone steady as he recorded. "She showed her boarding pass 3 times. They said it had to be fake." Madison Taylor, a 16-year-old white girl waiting for her connection to Miami, had been live streaming the incident since it began. Her following was modest, mostly friends from school, but the viewer count was climbing rapidly. 347, 412, 506 viewers watching as she narrated. "They're taking her away now. Her wrists are literally bleeding. I don't understand how this is happening in Twitch." The comment section erupted with real-time reactions. "What the actual fuck? Someone call the police on the police. This is straight-up assault. Skyway Airlines explain this right now." As the officers pushed Olivia toward a security office, her gaze remained forward, her shoulders straight despite the pain. She had been taught her entire life that the world would not see her brilliance first, it would see her skin. But she had also been taught something else: dignity cannot be handcuffed. "My phone, Debafen," Olivia stated, her voice firm but not confrontational. "I need to make a call." "Phones are privilege, not rights," snapped Officer James Peterson, snatching her designer bag and placing it beyond reach. His voice had the practiced rhythm of someone who enjoyed denying small dignities. "You can call your parents after we process you." Olivia's eyes flickered briefly to her messenger bag. Inside was not only her phone but her Harvard interview materials and something else: her mother's pilot wings, the talisman she carried for strength. More importantly, it contained her identification, the ID that would change everything if only they would look. Little did Rebecca Morrison know that in less than 24 hours, she would be the one facing questions, and Skyway Airlines would never be the same again. "Stop resisting," barked Peterson, though Olivia was walking calmly. "I'm not resisting," she replied evenly. "The handcuffs are cutting into my skin. I'm bleeding. If you'd stop struggling, they wouldn't hurt," Officer Sarah Martinez added, though Olivia hadn't moved a muscle except to walk where directed. Unlike Peterson, Martinez seemed uncomfortable with the situation, her eyes darting around as more phones recorded the scene. Passengers parted like water as they moved through the terminal. Some looked away in discomfort. Others stared openly, their expressions a mixture of confusion, distress, and from a few satisfaction at seeing what they assumed was justice being served. Madison's live stream comments exploded. WTF is happening? Someone call the police on the police. This is racial profiling happening live. Where is this Atlanta? Someone go help her. As they reached the security office, Olivia felt a strange calm descend. Her father's words echoed in her mind. When the world sees your skin before your soul, let your dignity speak louder than their prejudice. She straightened her spine as they pushed her through the door, away from public view, away from the witnesses and their cameras, away from any chance of reaching her father. Process her, Rebecca instructed the security team, as though Olivia were a package rather than a person. And check that laptop again. I'm certain it's stolen property. The door closed with a final click, sealing Olivia into a nightmare that would ultimately transform an industry. But first, there would be blood, humiliation, and a reckoning none of them saw coming. Have you ever been dismissed so completely that someone bet their reputation that you would fail? Olivia Jackson was about to teach them all a lesson in misjudgment they would never forget. Backstory. Introduction. 7 hours earlier, morning sunlight had streamed through the windows of a modest but elegant townhouse on the outskirts of Atlanta. Olivia Jackson stood before her mirror, smoothing the collar of her neatly pressed white blouse. Her natural hair was pulled back in a professional style, and her dark eyes reflected a determination beyond her 17 years. On her bed lay an open backpack, meticulously organized with color-coded folders, printed research papers, and presentation slides stored in a protective case. The title page was visible: Next Generation Propulsion Systems Efficiency, Innovations for Commercial Aviation. This was no ordinary high school project. This was Olivia's ticket to Harvard University's prestigious aerospace engineering program, her dream since she was 9 years old. "You've got this," came a deep, warm voice from her doorway. Marcus Jackson leaned against the frame, watching his daughter with undisguised pride. At 48, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built something significant from nothing. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, but he wore no flashy jewelry, no designer labels screaming wealth. Few people outside the aviation industry would recognize Marcus Jackson on sight, and that was exactly how he wanted it. As the founder and CEO of Skyway Airlines, he had built a commercial aviation empire worth billions. Yet he had deliberately kept his face off magazine covers and his name out of society pages. "I know, Dad," Olivia replied, though her fingers nervously adjusted her blouse again. "The interview's at 5 p.m. I've rehearsed my presentation 12 times. Marcus smiled, his expression softening the stern lines of his face. "That's not what I'm talking about. You've got this because you're brilliant and because you've earned every opportunity through your own merit." He stepped into the room and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "Remember what I always tell you. Respect can't be demanded." Olivia recited the familiar words, comforting her like a favorite a blanket. "It must be earned. But never let anyone take yours away," he finished, his voice dropping to the resonant bass that so rarely emerged outside their home. Unlike other CEOs who flaunted their success through their children, Marcus had raised Olivia without the trappings of privilege. No private jets, no chauffeurs, no elite private schools where her last name would open doors. He wanted her to understand that her worth came not from his power, but from her own effort and character. When Olivia had won the Regional Robotics Championship last year, she'd done so with a team from her public high school, using parts they'd scrounged and saved for. When she'd earned perfect SAT scores, she'd done it through late nights studying after her volunteer shifts at the local science center. The Harvard scholarship interview was the culmination of years of genuine work. "When the world looks at you," Marcus said softly, his expression growing more serious, "they may not see your brilliance first. They'll see your skin. So stay proud. Stay composed. No matter what." Olivia nodded. At 17, she thought she understood what her father meant. She did, but not yet how deeply she would need to draw on that lesson today. "Your mom would be so proud," Marcus added, his voice catching slightly. Diana Jackson had died from cancer when Olivia was just 9. But her spirit lived on in their home in the books she'd loved that still filled their shelves, in the vintage flight manuals she'd collected, in the passion for aviation she'd instilled in both her husband and daughter. "I know," Olivia whispered. She picked up her mother's pilot wings pin. Diana had been one of the first black female commercial pilots for a major airline and fastened it to her blazer, not as a symbol of nepotism, but as a private talisman of strength. Marcus checked his watch. I need to head to the office. The board meeting starts in an hour. He hesitated, the protective father momentarily overtaking the CEO who preached self-reliance. I could still have the company jet take you to Boston. Olivia shook her head firmly. No special treatment. Remember, that was our deal. I fly commercial like everyone else. Marcus laughed, a deep rumbling sound that filled the room. Stubborn just like your mother. His expression softened. One small compromise. I did book you first class, not for status, but for safety. I sleep better knowing you're comfortable to traveling alone. Fine, Olivia conceded with a smile, but only because it makes you feel better. Neither of them could have imagined how that small compromise, that simple first-class ticket, would change everything in just a few hours. Text me when you land, Marcus said, embracing his daughter. Always do, she replied, returning the hug with equal strength. As he turned to leave, Olivia caught a glimpse of his expression, a mixture of pride and something else. Worry. Perhaps the world had not always been kind to them, despite their success, or perhaps because of it. Dad, she called as he reached the door. I'll make you proud today. Marcus's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Olivia, you've never done anything but make me proud every single day. As the door closed behind him, Olivia returned to her preparations, unaware that today's test would have nothing to do with aerospace engineering and everything to do with the lessons her parents had taught her about maintaining dignity in a world determined to strip it away. Early warning signs. The first crack in Olivia's perfect morning appeared at the check-in counter. While white passengers ahead of her were processed efficiently, barely glancing up from their phones. The gate agent, a thin-lipped woman with rectangular glasses named Sandra Williams, spent nearly 5 minutes examining Olivia's identification. Is there a problem? Olivia asked politely, maintaining the pleasant smile her father had taught her was sometimes necessary armor. Sandra's eyes narrowed, flicking between Olivia's face and ID with obvious suspicion. Her fingers tapped the keyboard with unnecessary force. How did you purchase this ticket? The question came out clipped, each word bitten off as though expensive to produce. Online, like everyone else. Olivia answered, keeping her voice level despite the implied accusation. Sandra pursed her lips. First class is expensive. Yes, it is. Olivia agreed, offering nothing more. The silent standoff stretched until the agent behind Sandra glanced over with raised eyebrows. Finally, Sandra reluctantly printed the boarding pass, sliding it across the counter with barely concealed disdain. Gate 32B. Boarding at 3:45 p.m. Olivia maintained her composure, thanking the woman anyway. She'd learned to stay graceful even when people weren't. But as she walked towards security, she noticed something unusual. A small red mark in the corner of her boarding pass, a symbol she'd never seen before on previous flights. It looked like a flag, a code of some kind. R7. She studied it for a moment, then tucked the boarding pass into her pocket, dismissing it as some new security feature. She didn't know yet that the small red mark would follow her through every checkpoint that day. Random screening, announced a TSA officer as Olivia approached the scanner. Though she'd already removed her shoes, belt, and laptop as required, she was directed to a separate lane. Arms out, legs apart, instructed Officer James Peterson, a stocky man with close-cropped hair and a jaw that seemed permanently clenched. His voice carried the flat certainty of someone who enjoyed exercising control over others. Wider. Olivia complied silently as he waved the metal detecting wand around her body with exaggerated thoroughness. Across the checkpoint, a white businessman in a rumpled suit passed through with a cursory bag check. A white teenage girl approximately Olivia's age sailed through without even removing her shoes. We'll need to search your bag, Peterson said after the wand revealed nothing, his tone suggesting he'd found what he expected, despite evidence to the contrary. Of course, Olivia replied evenly. The TSA agent's latex gloves snapped as he put them on, the sound unnervingly loud in the otherwise muted security area. He began removing Olivia's carefully organized presentation materials, spreading them across the metal table with deliberate carelessness. What's this for? He asked, holding up her engineering diagrams with suspicious scrutiny, turning the pages sideways as though their orientation might reveal hidden threats. "It's a propulsion system designed for my Harvard interview," she explained. "I'm applying for their aerospace engineering program." Peterson's eyebrows raised slightly, skepticism etched into the movement. "Uh-huh." The syllables dripped with disbelief. He continued rifling through her materials, checking every folder, opening her laptop and scrutinizing the desktop. The meticulous organization Olivia had spent an hour perfecting that morning was destroyed in minutes. "Is something wrong?" she asked as he checked the same pocket for a third time. "Just being thorough," he replied without meeting her eyes. The practiced detachment of someone who had performed this theater many times before. Behind her, another passenger muttered, "Come on, some of us have flights to catch." The facial recognition scanner seemed to linger on her face longer than it had for other passengers. The screen briefly displayed an alert secondary verification required. Peterson exchanged a glance with his colleague. "Wait here." As Olivia stood in the designated area, she checked the time on her phone, 2:37 p.m. Her flight wasn't for another hour, but anxiety began creeping in. The Harvard interview was scheduled for 5 o'clock p.m., and she'd planned to arrive early to prepare. After 7 minutes of waiting, she was finally cleared to proceed, but not before Peterson made a note in the system and placed a small sticker on her boarding pass, another marker, another flag. As she reassembled her presentation materials and repacked her bag, Olivia noticed a security monitor behind the counter. The screen displayed what appeared to be passenger information, including a field labeled Profile Status. She couldn't see what her profile said, but the screen changed quickly as she looked at it. Walking toward her gate, Olivia passed a young white woman in jeans and a hoodie who had just sailed through security with barely a glance at her ID. Their eyes met briefly, the girl looking away first with what might have been embarrassment or discomfort. At the food court, Olivia purchased a bottle of water. The cashier asked to see her boarding pass, something he hadn't requested from the middle-aged white man ahead of her, who had bought 3 alcoholic beverages without question. "Just checking which terminal," he explained unconvincingly when she raised an eyebrow. By the time Olivia reached gate 32B, she had been stopped, questioned, or randomly selected 4 times. Each time, her documents were scrutinized longer than seemed necessary. Each time, she maintained perfect composure, answered politely, and proceeded with dignity intact. But the red flag on her boarding pass seemed to grow heavier with each interaction. It wasn't simply bad luck or coincidence. There was a pattern forming, a net tightening around her that she could feel but not yet see clearly. As she took a seat near the gate, Olivia texted her father through security, "At gate now, me como aparento." "All good." She hesitated, then deleted the draft message about the random screenings. No need to worry him. She didn't realize that within the next hour, he would have far more to worry about than a few extra security checks. Part 2, the escalation. First-class passengers may now begin boarding. The announcement crackled over the speakers at gate 32B precisely at 3:42 p.m. Olivia gathered her messenger bag and Harvard materials, joining the short line designated for first-class boarding. The other passengers in line, predominantly white business travelers and an older couple, barely glanced in her direction as they shuffled forward, eyes on their phones or boarding passes. Rebecca Morrison, the Skyway gate agent with perfectly styled blonde hair and a too bright smile, scanned tickets efficiently until Olivia reached the front of the line. Her demeanor shifted instantly, professionalism replaced by barely disguised suspicion. "Excuse me," Rebecca said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, her voice carrying the nasal sharpness of someone accustomed to speaking over others. "I think you're in the wrong line. Economy boards later." Olivia felt the familiar sting of assumption, but kept her expression neutral. "I have a first-class ticket," she replied, extending her boarding pass. Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes as she took the document. She examined it with exaggerated scrutiny, turning it over as though expecting to find evidence of forgery. "This seems unusual," she said, her voice pitched to Carrie. "How did you come by this ticket?" Behind Olivia, a line was forming. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, while others appeared to be settling in for the entertainment of watching someone else's humiliation. "I purchased it online," Olivia explained calmly. "Like everyone else. First class is quite expensive," Rebecca noted. the implication hanging in the air between them like an accusation. Yes, it is, Olivia agreed, offering nothing more. Rebecca's hand subtly covered the scanner, preventing Olivia from moving forward. I'll need to verify this. We've had issues with fraudulent upgrades recently. The statement came with the practiced confidence of someone making up policies on the spot. No such announcement had been made to any other passengers. The businessman behind Olivia checked his watch impatiently. Is there a problem, he asked, his voice carrying the clipped authority of someone unused to waiting. Just a security verification, Rebecca responded brightly. Won't take but a moment. She picked up a phone, making a show of calling for authorization while blocking Olivia's path. Yes, I have a passenger here with a questionable first-class boarding pass. Yes, I understand. Olivia stood perfectly still, her father's words echoing in her mind. Dignity cannot be handcuffed. Her hands did not fidget. Her expression remained composed, but she was acutely aware of the eyes on her, the assumptions being made, the public theater of her humiliation. What's the holdup? Asked Karen Hamilton, a middle-aged white woman in expensive athleisure wear standing behind the businessman. Her voice carried the sharp edge of entitlement. Some of us have connections to make. Security verification, Rebecca repeated with professional crispness. She lowered her voice to a staged whisper. We need to be careful these days. The exaggerated wink that accompanied her words made it clear exactly what kind of careful she meant. The boarding system monitor displayed Olivia's information with a flashing alert, verification required, though nothing in the system actually required additional verification. Her ticket was legitimate. Her ID was valid. Her seat assignment confirmed. Thomas Rodriguez, the gate supervisor, approached with a tablet. What's happening? Rebecca. His tone was professional but tinged with weariness, as though this wasn't the first such incident he'd witnessed. Possible fraudulent boarding pass, Rebecca reported, the words emerging with practiced efficiency. First class, I've initiated Protocol 47. Rodriguez glanced at Olivia, then at his tablet. I don't see any system flags requiring Protocol 47. Rebecca's smile tightened, a flash of irritation crossing her face before she masked it with customer service professionalism. The system doesn't catch everything. That's why we have human oversight. Madison Taylor, the teenager who had been waiting for her connection to Miami, recognized Olivia from the security checkpoint earlier. She discreetly raised her phone, resuming her live stream as the situation unfolded. Y'all, I'm watching the same girl getting hassled again, she whispered into her stream. This is the third time since security. This is ridiculous, the businessman behind Olivia finally said, his patience visibly eroding. Either scan her pass or let the rest of us board. Sir, I understand your frustration, Rebecca replied with practiced customer service insincerity, each word coded in saccharine condescension. But security protocols must be followed. More phones emerged from the growing crowd. The public spectacle was expanding, exactly as Rebecca seemed to want. Olivia's Harvard interview materials felt heavy in her hands. The clock on the wall showed 3:49 p.m. Her flight would take approximately 2 hours. Even minor delays now threatened her carefully planned schedule. I can show additional identification, Olivia offered, reaching for her wallet. That won't be necessary, Rebecca replied, finally scanning the boarding pass. The system beeped green, confirming what Olivia already knew: the ticket was perfectly valid. You may board, but we'll need to verify your seating assignment once on the aircraft. As Olivia walked down the jet bridge, she felt Rebecca's eyes boring into her back. This wasn't over. The red flag on her boarding pass had marked her, and Rebecca Morrison seemed determined to find or create a problem. Behind her, Madison's live stream continued, now with 873 viewers and growing. The comments section filled with outrage. Why is she treating her like that? The ticket is clearly valid. Someone needs to report this airline. This is racism happening in real time. Sky! Wait, do you know your employees are doing this? What none of them yet realized was that this was only the beginning. The confrontation at the gate was merely the opening act in a drama that would soon involve federal authorities, viral videos, and the transformation of an entire industry. As Olivia stepped onto the aircraft, she touched her mother's pilot wings for strength, Diana Jackson had faced similar barriers and broken through them. Now it was her daughter's turn to navigate the turbulence of prejudice with the same grace and determination. But even Diana had never faced what awaited Olivia in seat 3A. False accusations. "Excuse me, this is first class." Rebecca Morrison had somehow materialized at the entrance to the aircraft, blocking Olivia's path as she attempted to find her assigned seat. The flight attendant's voice carried down the aisle, ensuring maximum audience for the confrontation. "Yes, I'm aware," Olivia replied evenly, her words measured but not submissive. "My seat is 3A. Let me see your boarding pass again," Rebecca demanded, though she had just verified it at the gate moments ago, her hand extended with fingers splayed, the gesture more suited for directing traffic than requesting documents. Olivia handed over the document without comment. First Officer Michael Lawrence glanced up from his pre-flight checks, watching the interaction with growing concern. Unlike Rebecca, his expression conveyed professional assessment rather than prejudice. "There seems to be a discrepancy," Rebecca declared, though the boarding pass clearly showed seat 3A. "This doesn't match our manifest." Each word emerged with the exaggerated precision of someone creating drama where none existed. Flight attendant Jessica Rivera approached, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes communicating discomfort with the situation. "Is there a problem?" Rebecca, unlike her colleague, her voice remained at a conversational volume. "Possible unauthorized upgrade," Rebecca replied, loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "We need to verify." Jessica checked her tablet. "The manifest shows Ms. Jackson in 3A. Everything appears to be in order." Her tone carried a subtle note of correction. Rebecca's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly, a flash of anger quickly masked. "I'd like to verify her identification as well. We've had reports of stolen credit cards being used for ticket purchases." No such reports existed. No such verification was standard procedure. But Olivia silently removed her ID from her wallet and presented it, maintaining composure as every passenger watched the spectacle. "This says you're 17, Rebecca noted with undisguised suspicion. "Traveling alone?" "Yes," Olivia confirmed. "To a college interview." "At Harvard," Rebecca added, her tone making the words sound like a punchline rather than a university. "For aerospace engineering." "That's correct." Karen Hamilton, who had boarded during the exchange, interjected from her seat across the aisle. Her voice carried the particular cadence of someone who frequently asked to speak to managers. "My daughter applied to Harvard, too." "Which prep school did you attend?" "Westlake Public," Olivia replied. Karen's eyebrows rose so high they threatened to disappear into her hairline. "Really, how interesting." The pause before interesting carried paragraphs of subtext. Rebecca used the distraction to continue her inspection, now focusing on Olivia's laptop. "This is an expensive computer. It's necessary for my engineering work," Olivia explained, the first hint of strain showing in her voice. The flight was scheduled to depart in 15 minutes, and this continued harassment was threatening her carefully planned schedule. "May I see your laptop bag?" Rebecca asked. But it wasn't really a question as she was already reaching for it. "I'd rather not have my materials disturbed," Olivia replied firmly. "They're organized for my presentation. If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't mind a quick security check," Rebecca insisted, her words carrying the familiar rhythm of authority figures throughout history, justifying intrusions. First Officer Lawrence stepped out of the cockpit. "Rebecca, is there an actual security concern here? We're on a schedule." His voice carried the calm authority of someone who regularly made life or death decisions at 35,000 feet. "Just following procedures, sir." Rebecca responded with practiced deference that vanished the moment she turned back to Olivia. "Won't take but a moment." Before Olivia could protest further, Rebecca grabbed her messenger bag, upending its contents onto the nearest seat. Meticulously organized presentation folders, research papers, and her mother's pilot wings tumbled out in disarray. "What are you doing?" Olivia asked, her voice rising slightly for the first time. "Standard security protocol," Rebecca lied smoothly. As Olivia moved to collect her scattered materials, Rebecca pulled a boarding pass from the seat pocket where she had just emptied Olivia's bag. "What's this, a boarding pass with someone else's name?" The theatrical gasp that accompanied the question would have been comical in any other context. Olivia stared in disbelief. That's not mine. You just pulled that from the seat pocket. The planted evidence dangled between them, a boarding pass that hadn't been there moments before, now presented as proof of wrongdoing. Several passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, the manufactured nature of the discovery apparent to anyone paying attention. Security issue, Rebecca announced loudly, pressing the intercom button. We need assistance in first class immediately. Jessica Rivera looked increasingly uncomfortable. Rebecca, I don't think she has fraudulent documents and possibly a stolen laptop. Rebecca continued, pointing at Olivia's MacBook. How does someone like you afford a first-class ticket and a $2,000 laptop? The mask had slipped. The pretense of security concerns had given way to the naked prejudice beneath. Someone like you hung in the air like poison gas. Madison's live stream, which had continued through boarding, now captured this escalation. Her viewership had climbed to 1,876 people, all witnessing Rebecca's fabricated evidence and thinly veiled racism in real time. That's not my boarding pass, Olivia stated firmly. You just planted that. Are you accusing me of lying? Rebecca's voice rose with practiced indignation, hitting a pitch designed to make her sound like the victim. These people always think they can just walk into spaces where they don't belong. Then they play the victim when caught. First Officer Lawrence stepped forward. That's enough, Rebecca. Captain needs to speak with you. But it was too late. Two airport security officers had already boarded in response to Rebecca's call, their expressions grim as they approached. Sir, this passenger is being disruptive and has fraudulent documents, Rebecca reported, handing them the planted boarding pass. I've done nothing wrong, Olivia stated, struggling to keep her voice steady as her Harvard future began slipping away. The clock now read 4:07 p.m. Each minute that passed was another minute closer to missing her interview. Ma'am, you'll need to come with us, the lead officer stated, reaching for Olivia's arm. Don't touch me, she said firmly. I have done nothing wrong. That is not my boarding pass. This is a setup. Rebecca's expression shifted to one of exaggerated fear. She's becoming aggressive. I don't feel safe. Her hand fluttered to her throat in a gesture so theatrical, it belonged on a soap opera. And just like that, the trap was sprung. The word aggressive, that loaded term so often used against Black individuals, regardless of their actual behavior, transformed Olivia from passenger to threat in the security officer's eyes. Hands behind your back, they ordered, reaching for their handcuffs. This is unnecessary. First Officer Lawrence objected. There's no threat here. His professional assessment carried no weight against the machinery of bias now in motion. But Rebecca had played her cards perfectly. Once security was involved and the word aggressive deployed, the machinery of bias moved with its own momentum. As the cold metal closed around Olivia's wrists, she thought of her father and what he would say if he could see her now. She thought of her mother's pilot wings, now scattered on the floor of an aircraft where Diana had once commanded the cockpit. You're making a serious mistake, Olivia said quietly as they began to escort her from the plane. Behind her, Madison's live stream captured every moment, her trembling voice providing commentary. They're arresting her for literally nothing. She didn't do anything wrong. They planted evidence and now they're taking her away in handcuffs. The viewer count hit 6,432 and was climbing exponentially as the injustice unfolded in real time for a growing digital audience. Hashtags began forming spontaneously in the comments. Hashtag flying while black, hashtag skyway shame, hashtag bleeding, handcuffs, hashtag justice for Olivia. What Rebecca couldn't possibly know was that among those viewers, an executive assistant was about to burst into a Skyway Airlines board meeting with a tablet displaying her boss's daughter in handcuffs. Justice was about to board this flight with a first-class ticket of its own. Detention and handcuffs, tighten those cuffs, instructed Airport Security Chief Daniel Wilson as Olivia was marched through the terminal. His voice carried the bored certainty of someone who had judged her case before hearing it. Can't have her causing more trouble. Officer Sarah Martinez complied, ratcheting the metal bands a notch tighter around Olivia's slender wrists. The steel bit deeper into her skin, the sharp edge finally breaking through. A thin line of blood appeared, trickling down toward her palm. The handcuffs are too tight, Olivia stated, her voice calm despite the pain. I'm bleeding. Stop resisting and they won't hurt, Martinez replied automatically, though Olivia had offered no resistance whatsoever. Unlike Wilson, Martinez at least had the decency to look uncomfortable as crimson droplets began marking their path through the terminal. The terminal had fallen into an eerie hush as passengers stopped to watch the spectacle, a young black woman in business attire being paraded through the airport in handcuffs, blood now visibly dripping from her restraints. Phone cameras tracked their progress, digital eyes capturing what human ones too often refuse to see. 4:13 p.m. The timestamp would later become significant in depositions and legal documents. The exact moment when excessive force was documented against a minor who had committed no crime. Rebecca Morrison walked slightly behind the officers, her posture radiating satisfaction as she loudly narrated for anyone within earshot. We have strict security protocols. Some people think the rules don't apply to them. Her voice carried the particular cadence of someone enjoying the power to humiliate another human being. Madison's live stream had grown to 12,437 viewers. The hashtag bleeding handcuffs was trending across multiple platforms. Comments flooded in faster than she could read them. This is assault. Someone called the FBI. They're making her bleed. Where are this girl's parents? Scott, wait, you better explain this. As they approached the security office, Olivia made one final attempt to assert her rights. I need to make a phone call. I'm a minor. I have the right to contact my parent. Her voice remained steady, but the growing bloodstains on her sleeve betrayed the physical cost of her composure. Chief Wilson scoffed, his laugh a short, dismissive bark. Rights are for people who follow the law, not troublemakers trying to scam their way into first class. I had a valid ticket, Olivia stated for what felt like the 100th time. Sure you did, Wilson replied dismissively. And I'm sure that $2,000 laptop was purchased legitimately too. The sarcasm dripped from each word like venom. They pushed her into a small room with no windows, away from the cameras and witnesses. Olivia noticed a security camera in the upper corner, its indicator light blinking red. As she watched, Officer Wilson reached up and adjusted something. The light stopped blinking. Camera malfunction, he announced to no one in particular, his tone suggesting this was routine. Happens all the time in this room. Olivia's pulse quickened for the first time. Without witnesses, without cameras. What would happen next? She thought of all the stories that began this way and ended in tragedy. I want to call my father, she stated firmly, refusing to let fear enter her voice. All in good time, Chief Wilson replied, placing her phone and bag on a metal table beyond her reach. His casual dismissal carried decades of systemic arrogance. First, we need to discuss the stolen laptop and fraudulent boarding pass. The boarding pass was planted by your flight attendant, Olivia explained with forced patience. The laptop is mine. I need to contact my father immediately. Martinez tightened the handcuffs another notch, causing Olivia to wince as more blood appeared. Attitude won't help your situation. Neither will bleeding from handcuffs applied to a cooperative minor, Olivia countered, her composure starting to fray under the pain and mounting pressure. Her Harvard interview was now effectively impossible to make. Rebecca Morrison entered the room with a folder she pretended to consult, flipping pages with theatrical importance. According to our records, we've had several incidents of ticket fraud recently. The profile matches exactly well. What profile? Olivia asked, though she already suspected the answer. Rebecca exchanged glances with Wilson but didn't respond directly. We'll need to contact law enforcement for formal charges. Time was slipping away. Blood continued to drip from Olivia's wrists onto the sterile white floor of the detention room. Her carefully constructed future, Harvard, aerospace engineering, following in her mother's pioneering footsteps, seemed to be dissolving with each crimson drop. Outside in the terminal, Madison's live stream had captured the entire journey to the security office. When Olivia disappeared behind closed doors, Madison turned to face her phone directly. They've taken her into that security room. Her wrists were literally bleeding from the handcuffs. She didn't resist at all. She was just trying to board her flight with a first-class ticket they kept saying was fake. Someone needs to help her. The viewer count had exploded to 37,294. The hashtag bleeding handcuffs was now the #1 trending topic nationally. Local news stations had picked up the feed and were broadcasting portions on their networks. Inside the detention room, Wilson scrolled through Olivia's phone, ignoring her repeated requests for her legal call. Harvard. Huh. Ambitious. His tone made the words sound like an insult. It's my right to call my parent, Olivia repeated, focusing on maintaining her composure despite the handcuffs cutting deeper with each movement. Rights are for citizens, Wilson replied dismissively. Not for... A sudden commotion outside the door interrupted him. Raised voices, the sound of multiple footsteps approaching rapidly. This area is restricted, came a voice from the hallway. Then another voice, deep and commanding. My daughter is in that room. Olivia's heart leapt. She knew that voice. It was the voice that had taught her about dignity and perseverance. The voice that had promised the world would try to define her by her skin, but could never diminish her worth. The door burst open. And in that moment, everything changed. Part 3, the investigation. Sir, I think you need to see this immediately. It's Olivia. The boardroom at Skyway Airlines headquarters fell silent as Victoria Ramirez, Marcus Jackson's executive assistant, burst through the doors. The urgency in her voice cut through the corporate decorum like a knife. Her normally impeccable professionalism had given way to genuine alarm. Marcus was midway through a presentation to potential investors, a $460 million deal that would expand Skyway's routes into emerging Asian markets. 14 executives in tailored suits sat around the polished mahogany table, their expressions shifting from annoyance at the interruption to curiosity. Victoria, we're in the middle of, Marcus began, his deep voice carrying the measured control that had become his trademark in business meetings. Sir, Victoria repeated, her voice steady but insistent as she held out her tablet. You need to see this now. Something in her tone made Marcus stop. In 15 years, Victoria had never interrupted a board meeting. Whatever this was, it was urgent. He took the tablet, and his world tilted on its axis. There on the screen was his daughter, his brilliant, composed Olivia being dragged through Atlanta International Airport in handcuffs. Blood visibly dripped from her wrists where the metal cut into her skin. The live stream showed her being paraded past staring passengers, her face maintaining dignity despite the public humiliation. The timestamp showed this was happening right now. For 3 heartbeats. Marcus stared at the screen in stunned silence. Then his training took over the same crisis management instincts that had built an airline empire from nothing. Gentlemen, ladies, he addressed the room without looking up from the screen, his voice betraying none of the storm building inside him. Something urgent requires my immediate attention. Nicholas will continue the presentation. Nicholas Bennett, Skyway's general counsel, looked up in surprise. He hadn't been briefed to lead this meeting, but one look at Marcus's expression told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't business. This was personal. Of course, Nicholas responded smoothly, rising to his feet as Marcus handed him the presentation remote. Marcus turned to Victoria as soon as they were in the hallway, his composed facade cracking slightly. What happened? The question emerged as a controlled growl. The details are still coming in, Victoria explained as they strode toward Marcus's office, her heels clicking rapidly against marble floors. From what we can gather, Olivia was attempting to board her flight to Boston when she was accused of having fraudulent documents. A flight attendant claimed her first-class ticket was fake. Which airline? Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Victoria hesitated. Skyway, sir. Flight 1326 to Boston. Marcus stopped walking. Our airline, our staff did this to my daughter. Yes, sir. A flight attendant named Rebecca Morrison appears to have escalated the situation. Security was called, and Olivia was removed from the aircraft in handcuffs. The blood, Marcus managed, his composure threatening to crack for the first time. The handcuffs appear to be extremely tight. They're cutting into her skin. Marcus's phone was already in his hand. 3 rapid calls, none to Olivia. The first to Federal Aviation Administration Liaison Officer Jonathan Parker. The second to Skyway's legal department. The third to the head of security at Atlanta International. This is Marcus Jackson, he stated calmly into the phone, his voice conveying authority rather than panic. My 17-year-old daughter is being illegally detained at Atlanta International. I need a federal response team there immediately. She's being held in a security office and is visibly injured. He listened briefly. Yes, that's correct. My daughter, Belle. Yes, I'll hold for the director. While on hold, said, Marcus turned to Victoria. I need everything we have on Rebecca Morrison. Complete employment history, performance reviews, passenger complaints, everything. Already compiling, sir, Victoria confirmed, her fingers flying across her tablet with practiced efficiency. Initial search shows 17 passenger complaints in the past year alone, all from minority passengers. And I need a car ready now. We're going to the airport. Nicholas Bennett appeared in the hallway, having smoothly exited the investor meeting. Marcus, what's happening? Marcus handed him the tablet still displaying the live stream. The image showed Olivia disappearing into a security office. Blood clearly visible on her wrists. Nicholas's legal mind immediately assessed the liability. This is catastrophic from multiple angles. His voice carried the clinical assessment of someone calculating damages. Civil rights violations, assault on a minor, false imprisonment. It's not about liability, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. It's about my daughter bleeding in handcuffs applied by our staff. Nicholas nodded, shifting gears instantly. I'll assemble a response team. Federal discrimination charges, unlawful detention, excessive force against a minor. And contact the FBI's Civil Rights Division, Marcus added as his call connected again. This crosses into federal jurisdiction. Marcus's phone pinged with a location alert, Olivia's emergency tracker showing her exact position in the airport. The technology had been installed after Diana's death, a father's precaution that was now proving essential. As they rushed toward the elevator, Victoria handed Marcus an initial report on Rebecca Morrison. Sir, there's a pattern. 17 passenger complaints in the last year, all from minority passengers, all dismissed as unsubstantiated by her supervisor. Marcus scanned the document, his expression darkening. Who dismissed these complaints? Security Chief Daniel Wilson, the same officer currently detaining Olivia. The elevator doors opened to reveal Marcus's private security detail already waiting. 4 men and women in plain clothes with discreet earpieces, former federal agents now employed by Skyway. Atlanta International, maximum priority, Marcus instructed as they moved toward the waiting car. Federal authorities will meet us there. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, Marcus made one more call to Maria Rodriguez, Skyway's general counsel. Maria, meet me at Atlanta International immediately. My daughter is being illegally detained by our staff. She's handcuffed and bleeding. I need the full weight of our legal department, and I need it now. As Marcus ended the call, Nicholas showed him something on his tablet. The live stream view count had reached 164,000. The hashtag bleeding handcuffs was trending nationally. Celebrities and influencers were beginning to share the video, amplifying its reach exponentially. This is already a PR catastrophe, Nicholas noted, his voice carrying the blended concern of counsel and friend. I don't care about PR, Marcus replied quietly. I care about my daughter's safety and the systemic failures that led to this. The car sped toward the airport, lights flashing as it cut through traffic. Inside, Marcus Jackson maintained the same composed exterior that had served him through countless business crises. But this wasn't business. This was his child bleeding in handcuffs because of the color of her skin, and someone was going to answer for every drop of that blood. How long until we arrive, he asked, checking his watch. 11 minutes, sir, the driver responded. Make it 8, Marcus instructed, his voice betraying no emotion. The digital clock on the dashboard read 4:55 p.m. Olivia's Harvard interview should have been starting in 5 minutes. Instead, she was detained, injured, and alone. But not for long. Airport power shift. This area is restricted. Security Officer Martinez stepped forward, blocking the hallway leading to the detention room where Olivia was being held. Her hand hovered near her taser, though her eyes betrayed uncertainty. My daughter's in that room. Marcus Jackson's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who hadn't raised his voice in professional settings for decades. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded attention, even without his title. Behind him stood an imposing group: Maria Rodriguez, Skyway's general counsel, Jonathan Parker, the FAA liaison officer who had arrived with remarkable speed, and 4 members of Marcus's personal security detail. Sir, you can't just, Martinez began, her official tone undermined by a nervous swallow. Actually, he can, interrupted Agent Parker, presenting his federal credentials. This is now a federal investigation into potential civil rights violations. Step aside. Martinez hesitated, looking toward Chief Wilson, who had emerged from the detention room. His imposing figure filled the doorway, years of authority radiating from his stance. "What the hell is going on here?" Wilson demanded, his face flushing with anger at the intrusion. The vein at his temple pulsed visibly, his authority challenged in what he considered his domain. "I could ask you the same question," Marcus replied evenly. "Why is my 17-year-old daughter handcuffed in your detention room with her wrists bleeding?" Wilson's expression shifted almost imperceptibly as he processed Marcus's words. "Your daughter, Olivia Jackson," Marcus confirmed. "A minor who you've detained without parental notification, restrained with excessive force, and denied her right to contact legal representation." Maria Rodriguez stepped forward, every inch the formidable legal counsel she was. Her precisely tailored suit and steel-rimmed glasses complemented her razor-sharp tone. "I've already contacted the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. They're quite interested in the multiple federal violations occurring here." At precisely 5:03 p.m., the power dynamics in Atlanta International Airport shifted like tectonic plates. What had been a routine detention of a suspicious passenger was suddenly a potential federal civil rights case involving the daughter of one of the most powerful men in commercial aviation, who also happened to be the CEO of the very airline involved. There must be some misunderstanding. Wilson backpedaled, his confident demeanor crumbling like sand under a wave. "We were simply following security protocols for fraudulent documentation." "The documentation was legitimate," Marcus stated, "as you would have discovered had you bothered to verify, rather than immediately applying handcuffs tight enough to draw blood." Rebecca Morrison appeared in the doorway behind Wilson, her face paling as she recognized Marcus Jackson, her company's founder and CEO, standing in the hallway with federal officers. The blood drained from her face so rapidly she seemed to age years in seconds. "Sir," she stammered, "I had no idea." "That she was my daughter," Marcus finished, his voice deadly quiet. "Would it have mattered? Would you have treated any 17-year-old girl differently if she wasn't black, or is causing physical harm to minors standard Skyway customer service?" Now, Agent Parker stepped forward. "I need to see the detained individual immediately." Wilson started to object, but the federal credentials left no room for argument. The small procession moved into the detention room, where Olivia sat with remarkable composure despite the blood that had now pooled beneath her chair from her wounded wrists. The moment Marcus saw his daughter handcuffed, bleeding, but maintaining the dignity he'd taught her, something shifted in his expression. The controlled corporate mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, revealing the rage of a father witnessing his child's suffering. "Olivia," he said softly, kneeling beside her chair. "Dad," she replied, her voice steady despite everything. "I maintained my composure." "I never doubted you would," he answered, examining her wounded wrists with gentle fingers. The metal had cut nearly a quarter-inch into her skin in places, leaving raw, bleeding furrows. "Remove these handcuffs immediately," Agent Parker commanded, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Officer Martinez fumbled with the keys, suddenly aware of the gravity of the situation. As the handcuffs fell away, the extent of Olivia's injuries became fully visible, deep lacerations circling both wrists, blood smeared across her palms and onto her once pristine white blouse. Maria Rodriguez documented everything with her phone: the injuries, the blood-stained handcuffs, the small puddle of blood on the floor beneath the chair. "This is assault on a minor," she stated clinically, "with significant aggravating factors including racial discrimination, abuse of authority, and falsification of evidence." Rebecca Morrison shrank back against the wall as Marcus turned his attention to her. "You planted a boarding pass to falsely accuse my daughter of fraud." It wasn't a question. Somewhere in the terminal, Madison's live stream had captured the entire sequence, including Rebecca pulling the boarding pass from the seat pocket after emptying Olivia's bag. "I was just following security protocols," Rebecca insisted weakly, her voice having lost the authoritative edge that had cut through Olivia's dignity just an hour earlier. "Which specific protocol required handcuffs tight enough to break skin?" Marcus asked, echoing Maria's earlier question to Wilson. "Which protocol justified denying a minor her right to contact her parent Which protocol instructed you to plant false evidence? Outside the detention room, a commotion was building. News crews had arrived, alerted by the viral video now approaching 500,000 views. Federal officers were establishing a perimeter, taking statements from witnesses, including Madison Taylor, whose live stream had captured crucial evidence. Jonathan Parker examined a document on his tablet. I'm seeing a passenger flagging code R7 applied to Ms. Jackson's ticket. Can someone explain what that designates? Wilson and Rebecca exchanged glances, but remained silent. The conspiracy of their system suddenly exposed to federal scrutiny. I believe I can answer that, came a new voice from the doorway. A slender Hispanic woman in a tailored suit stepped forward, presenting her credentials. Sophia Alvarez, Department of Transportation investigator. We've been monitoring certain passenger classification systems for potential discriminatory application. She displayed her tablet, showing the code that had appeared on Olivia's boarding pass. R7 is an internal flag, meaning verification required profile match. It's disproportionately applied to passengers of color traveling in premium cabins. That's a serious allegation, Agent Parker noted. With substantial statistical evidence to support it? Investigator Alvarez confirmed. We've documented 147 similar incidents across multiple airports in the past 6 months. As Olivia received medical attention for her wounded wrists, Marcus remained by her side, his presence both comfort and protection. The Harvard interview was long missed now, but somehow that seemed insignificant compared to the systemic failure unfolding before them. Your things, Olivia, Marcus said quietly, retrieving her messenger bag and phone from the metal table where they'd been placed beyond her reach. As she checked her belongings, Olivia's expression changed. Mom's wings are missing. The pilot wings pinned Diana Jackson's legacy, and Olivia's talisman was no longer among her possessions. Rebecca Morrison shifted uncomfortably, drawing everyone's attention. Slowly, reluctantly, she reached into her pocket and withdrew the small gold pin. It fell on the floor, she claimed unconvincingly. Marcus took the pin carefully, as though it contained his wife's very essence, and returned it to Olivia. The small act of theft, taking not just Olivia's dignity and safety, but a piece of her mother's memory, seemed to crystallize the profound injustice of the day. This isn't about one incident or one employee, Marcus stated, addressing everyone in the room. This is about systemic failures that allowed discrimination to become standard operating procedure. As they prepared to leave the detention room, Olivia paused to address Rebecca directly. Her wrists were now bandaged, the white gauze already showing spots of red where blood seeped through. The interview I missed today, she said calmly, was for a scholarship to develop bias detection algorithms for transportation systems. Perhaps if such a system had existed today, we wouldn't be here. With quiet dignity, Olivia walked out of the detention room under her own power, her father at her side. Behind them, the machinery of justice was already in motion, federal investigators securing evidence, legal teams preparing documentation, witnesses providing statements. The power had shifted. What began as the humiliation of a young black woman had transformed into the beginning of a reckoning that would reshape not just one airline, but an entire industry. And it had all been captured, moment by moment, for the world to see. Evidence collection, I need everything. Investigator Sophia Alvarez instructed her team as they set up operations in a commandeered conference room at Atlanta International. Boarding passes, security footage, employee communications, passenger complaints. Every piece of documentation related to passenger flagging systems, especially code R7. Her voice carried the sharp clarity of someone who had spent years building a case and finally found the perfect evidence. Each word emerged with the crisp precision of a prosecutor addressing a jury. It was 6:42 p.m., and the initial shock of Olivia's detention had evolved into a methodical federal investigation. Screens displayed multiple camera angles of the terminal, the aircraft, and the security checkpoints. Investigators cataloged evidence while others took witness statements in adjacent rooms. Andrew Thompson, Skyway's communications director, paced nervously at the edge of the activity. His phone buzzed constantly with media inquiries, but the airline had issued only a brief statement acknowledging an incident under investigation. Thompson's usual polished confidence had evaporated as the magnitude of the situation became clear. How bad is this? He asked Maria Rodriguez in a hushed voice, running his fingers through carefully styled hair that was beginning to wilt under stress. Legally, Maria raised an eyebrow. We're looking at multiple federal violations: civil rights infringement, assault on a minor, false imprisonment, evidence tampering. The liability is substantial. I meant from a PR perspective, Thompson clarified, adjusting his designer eyeglasses with nervous fingers. Maria's expression hardened. A 17-year-old black girl was handcuffed until she bled because one of our employees decided she didn't look like she belonged in first class. The evidence is crystal clear and has been viewed by 3.7 million people and counting. You tell me how bad it is. Across the room, investigator Alvarez examined a document on her tablet, her expression darkening. I need to speak with Marcus Jackson immediately. Marcus was in an adjacent room with Olivia, who was receiving more thorough medical treatment for her wrist injuries. When he emerged in response to Alvarez's request, his composed expression gave no hint of the emotions churning beneath. We've uncovered something significant, Alvarez explained, showing him her tablet. An internal memo regarding demographic considerations for premium cabin verification. The document displayed on the screen was dated 3 months earlier. It outlined passenger profile indicators as requiring additional verification for first-class and business-class cabins. The language was carefully corporate, avoiding explicitly racial terms, but the intent was clear. Certain passengers didn't fit the expected demographic profile of premium cabins and should be subject to enhanced verification. Who authorized this? Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. It appears to have originated from the security division. Alvarez replied, Chief Wilson's electronic signature is on the distribution list. Maria Rodriguez examined the document carefully. This goes beyond a single incident of discrimination. This is systemic, codified bias. That's not all, Alvarez continued, swiping to another document. We've identified a pattern of complaint dismissals. When passengers reported treatment similar to what your daughter experienced, their complaints were systematically classified as unsubstantiated and closed without investigation. By whom? Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. In 83% of cases, the final denial came from Chief Wilson. The implications were staggering. Not only had Skyway implemented a flagging system that disproportionately targeted passengers of color, but they had also created a mechanism to dismiss the resulting complaints. Meanwhile, digital evidence continued to accumulate. Madison Taylor's live stream had been joined by footage from multiple passengers, security cameras, and even Skyway's own internal systems. The combined evidence created an undeniable timeline. Olivia's boarding pass had been flagged with code R7 at check-in. She had been subjected to random secondary screening 4 times. Rebecca Morrison had publicly questioned her first-class status despite verification. False evidence had been planted to justify detention. Excessive force had been applied, resulting in physical injury. Her legal rights as a minor had been ignored. As the evidence mounted, Andrew Thompson attempted to craft a damage control strategy. We could issue a statement apologizing for the misunderstanding and emphasizing our commitment to diversity. Maria shot him a withering glance. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the system working exactly as designed to harass, intimidate, and exclude people based on their appearance. In another room, Olivia sat with a medical professional who was properly treating her wrist injuries. The cuts were deeper than initially assessed, requiring several small stitches and proper bandaging. As the doctor worked, Olivia reviewed her phone, seeing the missed call from Harvard and dozens of messages from friends who had seen the viral video. These will heal, the doctor assured her, gesturing to her wrists, but they'll likely leave scars. Olivia nodded, her expression contemplative rather than distressed. Some scars serve as reminders. When the bandaging was complete, a photographer from the federal investigation team documented her injuries from multiple angles. The clinical photography transformed her personal trauma into evidence. Each wound, each drop of blood now part of the official record. As evening fell, the investigation expanded to include Transportation Security Administration records, revealing that the random screenings Olivia experienced had been anything but random. The system had been programmed to flag certain combinations of factors, young plus black plus first class, equal additional verification required. This isn't about one bad employee, Investigator Alvarez concluded as she reviewed the evidence with Marcus and the legal team. This is about a system designed to produce exactly this outcome. Marcus had remained outwardly calm throughout the process, but those who knew him well could see the controlled fury in his eyes. When a representative from the airline's crisis management team approached with settlement paperwork, his response was unequivocal. "We're not settling this," he stated simply. "Sir," the representative began carefully, "given the potential liability and public relations impact, a generous settlement with a non-disclosure agreement would be the standard approach. There is nothing standard about handcuffing my daughter until she bleeds," Marcus replied. "This isn't about money. This is about ensuring this never happens again to anyone's daughter." As the investigation team prepared to transfer their operations to federal offices, Olivia rejoined her father. Despite everything, her composure remained remarkable, a testament to her strength and the lessons her parents had taught her about maintaining dignity in a world determined to strip it away. "The Harvard interview," she said quietly. "I missed it." "We'll address that," Marcus assured her. "But right now you need rest." Olivia shook her head, determination replacing exhaustion in her eyes. "What I need is to understand how this happened and how to prevent it from happening again." In that moment, Marcus saw not just his daughter but Diana's unflinching determination. The same spirit that had made her mother one of the first black female commercial pilots now burned in Olivia's fire. "I think," Olivia continued thoughtfully, "my algorithm project just found its perfect real-world application." As they prepared to leave the airport, the evidence collection continuing behind them, Olivia paused to thank Madison Taylor, whose live stream had provided crucial documentation of the incident. "Your quick thinking made a difference," Olivia told the younger girl. "When injustice happens in shadows, it thrives. You brought it into the light." Madison, still processing her unexpected role in the unfolding events, nodded solemnly. "I just did what seemed right. I couldn't believe what I was seeing." "That disbelief," Olivia replied, "is the first step toward change." As they walked toward the exit, the terminal fell strangely silent. Passengers and staff alike stopped to watch some recording with their phones, others simply bearing witness to the aftermath of injustice exposed. The bandages around Olivia's wrists stood out starkly against her skin, visible evidence of invisible bias, now impossible to ignore. Media explosion. Breaking news tonight, shocking footage from Atlanta International Airport shows a black teenager handcuffed until her wrists bled after attempting to board a first-class flight. National news reporter Gabriela Hernandez stood at the airport entrance, the terminal visible behind her as she addressed the camera. Her voice carried the measured gravity of someone who understood the weight of the story she was reporting. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Bleeding handcuffs teen detained for flying while black." Sources have now confirmed the teenager is Olivia Jackson, the 17-year-old daughter of Marcus Jackson, founder and CEO of Skyway Airlines, the very airline whose staff initiated the incident. By 8:15 p.m., what had begun as one teenager's live stream had exploded into the biggest aviation story of the year. The hashtag Justice for Olivia competed with hashtag Bleeding Handcuffs for the top trending spot nationwide. The original video had been viewed over 7 million times, with clips and edits spreading across all major platforms. In a downtown Atlanta hotel suite hastily converted into a command center, Skyway's crisis team monitored the digital firestorm. "Stock is down 7% in after-hours trading," reported the financial officer, staring at his laptop with growing alarm. "Major shareholders are demanding statements. The narrative is completely out of our control," added a social media analyst, gesturing to multiple screens displaying comment sections and trending topics. "We're seeing calls for boycotts across all platforms." Skyway's Instagram has lost 124,000 followers in the last 2 hours, another team member reported. "The comment sections on all our posts are being flooded with bleeding handcuff emojis." Andrew Thompson paced nervously, his usual media training failing him in the face of such clear, compelling evidence. There was no way to spin handcuffs cutting into a teenager's flesh. No corporate statement could erase the blood that had dripped into the airport floor. "We need Marcus to make a statement," Thompson insisted. "Something personal, acknowledging the gravity while assuring the public of swift action. Marcus won't be making statements until we have concrete solutions, not just apologies," Maria Rodriguez informed him. "His priority is his daughter and systemic change, not stock prices." Across social media, The story was evolving with remarkable speed. Tyler Williams, a 22-year-old TikTok influencer with a focus on social justice, created a meticulously researched breakdown of the incident that reached 8.3 million views within hours. "Let me walk you through exactly what happened," Tyler explained, splitting his screen to show multiple camera angles of Olivia's ordeal. His rapid-fire delivery carried the intensity of someone revealing a conspiracy. "Notice how many times she's asked for her legal rights as a minor. Notice how the handcuffs are deliberately tightened. Notice how evidence is planted." His clinical analysis, combined with emotional testimony from witnesses, created a devastating portrait of systematic discrimination. Meanwhile, competing airlines rushed to distance themselves from the incident, issuing statements about their commitment to equitable treatment and dignity for all passengers. Industry publications began investigating whether similar flagging systems existed across other carriers. At the hotel, Olivia watched a small portion of the coverage before turning away from the screens. Seeing herself, her trauma, her humiliation, her bleeding wrists displayed for millions had its own psychological impact. "You don't have to watch this," Marcus told her gently. "I do," she replied. "Not all of it, but enough to understand how it's being received. This isn't just about me anymore." She was right. In less than 12 hours, Olivia Jackson had become a symbol, her bleeding wrists a visceral representation of the everyday indignities and dangers faced by people of color in America. The media coverage wasn't uniformly sympathetic. However, several conservative commentators questioned whether the response was proportionate to the incident, suggesting Olivia might have done something to provoke the treatment. Online forums included scattered voices defending Rebecca Morrison, arguing she was just doing her job, or questioning why Olivia hadn't simply complied to avoid escalation. These skeptical voices were vastly outnumbered, but added a dimension of complexity to the unfolding narrative, one that reflected broader societal divisions around issues of race and authority. When Gabriela Hernandez requested an interview, Olivia considered carefully before agreeing to answer just one question on camera. "Can you describe how you felt being handcuffed until you bled?" Gabriela asked. Microphone extended. Olivia's response was not what anyone expected. "I'd rather discuss how to prevent this from happening to anyone else," she said calmly. This incident represents a systemic failure that extends far beyond one airline or one airport. The question isn't how I felt, the question is what we're going to do to ensure no one else feels that way again. Her measured response, refusing victimhood while demanding accountability, shifted the narrative yet again. Discussion forums and comment sections began filling with similar stories from passengers of color who had experienced random screenings, seat verification, and harassment. A pattern emerged, not isolated incidents, but a widespread phenomenon that had been normalized across the industry. Social media users began identifying similar flagging systems at multiple airlines, using screenshots and personal accounts to document what appeared to be industry-wide practices. As midnight approached, Marcus received a call from Robert Fisher, Skyway's board chairman, who had been conspicuously silent until now. "Marcus, the board is deeply concerned about the company's exposure here," Fisher began without preamble, his voice carrying the practiced urgency of someone used to measuring risk in dollars. "We'd like to propose an emergency settlement, full confidentiality, generous compensation, immediate resolution." Marcus's response was brief and final. "Robert, I've built this airline for 20 years. In all that time, I've never used my position for personal advantage. But I will use every ounce of my authority to ensure what happened to Olivia never happens to anyone else's child. This isn't going away with a settlement. This ends with real, verifiable change." After ending the call, Marcus joined Olivia on the hotel suite's balcony. She stood looking out at the Atlanta skyline, her bandaged wrists resting lightly on the railing. "Harvard called," she said without turning around. "They've rescheduled my interview for next week. They saw the news." "That's good," Marcus replied, standing beside her. "Though I imagine your application just gained a unique perspective on bias in transportation systems." A small smile touched Olivia's lips. "I was thinking the same thing. My algorithm project suddenly has real-world application data." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Father and daughter united not just by blood, but by shared purpose. "Mom would have been furious," Olivia finally said. "Beyond furious," Marcus agreed, "but also proud of how you handled yourself. I kept thinking about what she would do, Olivia admitted, how she navigated being the only black woman in so many cockpits. She maintained her dignity without sacrificing her fire, Marcus said softly, just like you did today. Below them, news vans still clustered around the hotel entrance. Social media continued to explode with outrage and calls for accountability. The 24-hour news cycle demanded immediate responses and dramatic action. But real change would require more than hashtags and viral videos. It would require systematic examination, technological innovation, and institutional courage. We have work to do, Olivia said simply. Marcus nodded, his eyes on the horizon where the first hints of dawn would eventually appear. Yes, we do. The media explosion had focused the world's attention. Now came the harder part, transforming momentary outrage into lasting change. Part 4, the response. This is unacceptable, completely unacceptable. Robert Fisher, Skyway's 67-year-old board chairman, paced the length of the executive boardroom, his face flushed with a combination of anger and fear. Each step carried the agitated energy of someone watching decades of wealth evaporate in real time. Around the midnight black conference table sat the airline's top leadership, summoned for an emergency meeting that couldn't wait until morning. The stock has dropped 12% in after-hours trading, Fisher continued, gesturing to the financial projections displayed on the wall screen. His normally measured voice cracked with the strain of impending disaster. We're looking at potential class-action lawsuits, federal civil rights investigations, and catastrophic reputation damage. Marcus Jackson sat quietly at the head of the table, his calm presence a stark contrast to Fisher's agitation. The past 18 hours had transformed everything, not just for his doll and for the company he had built from nothing. Where do we stand legally? Fisher demanded, turning to Maria Rodriguez. Preliminary assessment indicates potential liability exceeding $175 million. Maria replied candidly, not softening the blow. The evidence is overwhelming and publicly available. Multiple federal investigations have already been opened. Elena Vasquez, Skyway's operations director, studied the incident timeline displayed on her tablet. Unlike Fisher's panicked response, her analysis was methodical and precise. Beyond the immediate case, we have to consider the implications of the passenger flagging system. If similar discrimination has been systemic, the liability multiplies significantly. Then we settle with the Jackson girl immediately, Fisher declared, pounding his fist on the table for emphasis. Maximum compensation, full confidentiality agreement, terminate the employees involved, and issue a strong public statement about our zero-tolerance policy. The Jackson girl is my daughter, Marcus reminded him quietly, his voice carrying a warning that silenced the room. And this isn't about money or public relations. This is about addressing the root causes that allowed this to happen. With all due respect, Marcus, Fisher countered, adjusting his tie as though preparing for battle. Your personal connection to this case creates a conflict of interest. The board's primary responsibility is to shareholders. And my primary responsibility is to my daughter and to every other passenger who boards our aircraft expecting to be treated with basic human dignity. Marcus replied, his voice measured but firm. This isn't just about Olivia. This is about a system that flagged her as suspicious because she was black in first class. The room fell silent as the implications settled over the gathered executives. What had initially been viewed as a terrible but isolated incident was revealing itself to be something far more disturbing, evidence of structured, systematic discrimination embedded within company protocols. What exactly are you proposing? Fisher finally asked, his earlier bluster deflated by the weight of uncomfortable truth. Marcus stood, taking control of the meeting with quiet authority. A comprehensive overhaul of our passenger processing systems, beginning with the immediate elimination of demographic-based flagging codes. He moved to the presentation screen, displaying a project outline that had been prepared with remarkable speed. Phase 2 will implement a bias detection system and algorithm designed to identify and prevent discriminatory patterns in real time. An algorithm, Fisher repeated skeptically, his eyebrows rising toward his receding hairline. We're talking about a public relations crisis, not a technology problem. We're talking about a human dignity problem that technology can help solve, Marcus corrected, each word precisely measured. The same biases that led to my daughter bleeding in handcuffs exist throughout our systems. We can't just fire Rebecca Morrison and pretend this is resolved. Elena Vasquez studied the proposal with professional interest. Implementation timeline: 60 days for phase 1, airline boss. Marcus replied, complete system integration within 6 months. Fisher balked, his hands spreading in exasperation. That's impossible. Standard protocol updates take 18 months minimum. This isn't standard, Marcus stated simply, the weight of unsaid meaning hanging in his words. And neither is our response. The financial implications were staggering: $42 million for system-wide reforms versus potential liability approaching $175 million if similar cases emerged. But beyond the numbers lay a more fundamental question: what kind of company was Skyway going to be? The board will never approve this kind of expenditure based on one incident, Fisher argued, his businessman's instincts still calculating cost against benefit. Marcus's expression didn't change as he placed a folder on the table. This isn't one incident. From inside were printed copies of 147 passenger complaints filed over the past year, all from passengers of color, all describing similar treatment, all dismissed as unsubstantiated. I had Victoria compile these when we returned from the airport, Marcus explained, his voice carrying the weight of systemic failure. Every one of these passengers experienced some version of what happened to Olivia. The only difference is that their stories weren't live-streamed to millions. The executives passed the documents around the table, their expressions growing increasingly somber as they read account after account of random screenings, seat verification challenges, and thinly veiled accusations. We didn't know, one director said weakly. We should have known, Marcus corrected, his tone leaving no room for abdication of responsibility. These complaints were filed through our system. They were systematically buried. He pulled up a photograph on the main screen, Olivia's bandaged wrists, the white gauze stained with spots of blood. The clinical image cut through corporate euphemisms and legal calculations, forcing everyone to confront the human reality of their system's failure. Would you accept this happening to your child? Marcus asked quietly. Would any of you consider this an acceptable outcome of our security protocols? The silence that followed was answer enough. I built this airline with a simple promise: everyone deserves to fly with dignity. Marcus continued. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that everyone means everyone, not just passengers who fit someone's preconception of who belongs in first class. Maria Rodriguez reviewed the implementation plan. From a legal perspective, proactive systemic reform significantly mitigates future liability. It demonstrates good faith and commitment to addressing root causes. And from a human perspective, Marcus asked, looking around the table, Elena Vasquez was the first to speak, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who recognized the moment's gravity. From a human perspective, it's simply the right thing to do. The discussion continued for hours, weighing financial implications against moral imperatives, short-term costs against long-term sustainability. As dawn broke over Atlanta, the board reached its decision. By unanimous vote, they approved the most comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative in aviation history, the complete elimination of demographic-based passenger profiling, mandatory bias recognition training for all customer-facing staff, and the implementation of a revolutionary new algorithm designed to detect and prevent discrimination before it occurred. The algorithm that would become known as Fair Flight was already taking shape in Olivia Jackson's mind as she slept in the adjacent hotel room, her bandaged wrists a constant reminder of why such innovation was necessary. As the executives filed out of the boardroom, Robert Fisher lingered behind with Marcus. You know, the Department of Transportation will use this to justify new regulations across all airlines, Fisher noted, his businessman's mind already calculating competitive implications. Our competitors will face the same requirements eventually. Good, Marcus replied simply. This was never about competitive advantage. It's about making air travel what it should have been all along, equally dignified for every passenger. Fisher shook his head slowly, running his hand through gray hair that seemed to have whitened further during the long night. I've been in this industry for 40 years. Change usually comes slowly, painfully, after years of resistance. Sometimes, Marcus said, thinking of his daughter's quiet courage, change comes because someone bleeds for it. As the sun rose over Atlanta, Skyway Airlines began the transformation from crisis to catalyst, not just salvaging a reputation, but redefining an industry. Technical solution. The sprawling technical headquarters of Skyway Airlines buzzed with unprecedented activity. 3 days after the incident, the cavernous main development floor had been transformed into what resembled a war room. Engineers hunched over workstations. Screens displayed complex data visualizations. And at the center of it all stood Olivia Jackson, her bandaged wrists a stark reminder of why they were all there. The system operates on three core principles, Olivia explained, addressing the assembled team with remarkable confidence for a 17-year-old. Her voice carried the precision of someone who had spent years refining a vision: detection, intervention, and adaptation. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the architecture of what had been dubbed the Fair Flight algorithm. What had begun as a Harvard application project had evolved with astonishing speed into a comprehensive bias detection system. David Reynolds, Skyway's 52-year-old chief technology officer, studied the diagrams with growing appreciation. His initial skepticism had given way to professional respect. You developed the initial framework for this before the incident, the theoretical foundation, Olivia confirmed, gesturing to a section of code with elegant logic patterns. Recent events have provided practical application parameters. The diplomatic understatement drew sad smiles from several team members. Everyone in the room knew that the bandages on Olivia's wrists weren't just medical necessities, they were visceral proof of concept. Laura Mendez, a systems engineer with expertise in pattern recognition algorithms, pointed to a section of the code displayed on her screen. Her normally reserved demeanor gave way to genuine enthusiasm. The multivariable tracking is impressive. 37 distinct metrics monitored simultaneously. It had to be comprehensive, Olivia explained, bringing up a complex matrix of interaction patterns. Bias doesn't manifest in isolation. It's the pattern of disparate treatment across multiple touchpoints that reveals systematic discrimination. David moved to the main presentation screen, bringing up the implementation timeline. His brow furrowed as he considered the ambitious schedule. 60 days for initial deployment is aggressive. It's necessary, Marcus interjected from the doorway where he'd been quietly observing. Unlike his typical business attire, he wore a casual button-down with sleeves rolled up, a visual signal that this was hands-on work, not a boardroom exercise. Every day we operate without this system is another day passengers face what Olivia experienced. The room fell momentarily silent, the gravity of the mission reinforced by the CEO's presence and his personal stake in its success. The technical challenges are significant, Laura noted, scrolling through implementation requirements. Each item on her list would normally constitute a major project on its own. Integration with existing reservation systems, security protocols, staff training interfaces. Which is why I've authorized unlimited resources, Marcus responded. Whatever you need, additional personnel, equipment, outside expertise, consider it approved. David brought up the next major hurdle, his pragmatic nature focusing on implementation realities. This would require retraining all 12,400 customer-facing employees. Then we train 12,400 employees, Marcus stated without hesitation. The absolute certainty in his voice shifted the conversation from whether it could be done to how quickly it could be implemented. Laura expanded the system architecture display, highlighting the real-time dashboard component. The fairness metrics would be visible to management at all times, a continuous feed of equity indicators across every airport, every flight. Not just to management, Olivia corrected. The dashboard should be publicly accessible. Transparency drives accountability. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. Public access to internal metrics was virtually unprecedented in the industry. That's unusual, David said diplomatically, adjusting his glasses as he considered the implications. So is having your wrists bleed from handcuffs applied for flying while black, Olivia replied evenly. Unusual circumstances require unusual solutions. The room fell silent again, the bandages on her wrists more eloquent than any argument. Marcus nodded his approval. Transparency it is. If we're truly committed to change, we shouldn't fear public scrutiny of our progress. As the technical team delved deeper into implementation details, the revolutionary nature of the Fair Flight system became increasingly clear. This wasn't just a response to one incident, it was a fundamental reimagining of how an airline monitored and prevented discrimination. The algorithm would track everything from how long different passengers spent in security screenings to subtle patterns in employee language when addressing different demographics. It would flag potential bias in real time, allowing for immediate intervention before situations escalated. There's one critical challenge we haven't addressed, Laura noted, highlighting a section of the diagnostic module. Her fingers tapped a rapid rhythm as she considered the problem. False positives could create significant operational issues. If the system flags too many non-discriminatory interactions as problematic, it loses credibility. Olivia had anticipated this concern. She brought up a complex matrix of behavioral patterns that the algorithm had been designed to recognize. The system doesn't flag individual interactions in isolation, she explained, her voice taking on the cadence of someone explaining a breakthrough. It identifies patterns across multiple touchpoints and compares them against demographic baselines. A single discrepancy isn't enough to trigger an alert. It requires a statistically significant deviation from equitable treatment. David studied the methodology with growing admiration. You've developed a contextual analysis framework that accounts for legitimate operational variables while isolating actual bias indicators. This is remarkable work, particularly from someone who was supposed to be interviewing for college admission rather than revolutionizing airline operations. Marcus added with quiet pride. Olivia's response was characteristically measured. Sometimes the most important innovations come from unexpected circumstances. As the day progressed, the technical challenges were systematically addressed. Integration pathways were established. Data validation protocols were designed. Security parameters were defined. What would normally have been an 18-month development cycle was compressed into an unprecedented 60-day sprint. By late afternoon, Laura had made a crucial breakthrough in the algorithm's learning mechanics. Her normally reserved demeanor gave way to genuine excitement. "I think we've eliminated the false positive problem," she announced, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "By implementing a progressive verification protocol, we can ensure 99.7% accuracy in bias identification." Which means, Marcus asked, which means the system will correctly identify actual bias patterns while ignoring statistically insignificant variations. Laura explained it won't cry wolf, but it won't miss legitimate concerns either. As evening approached, the team presented their implementation roadmap, an aggressive but achievable plan to deploy the Fairflight system across Skyway's entire operation within the compressed timeline. Marcus reviewed the final proposal with characteristic thoroughness. "And this will prevent what happened to Olivia from happening to anyone else. It would have flagged the discriminatory pattern within the first 3 interactions," Laura confirmed, "before she ever reached the gate, much less the aircraft." For the first time since the incident, something like hope flickered across Marcus's expression. "Then we move forward. Full implementation, maximum priority." As the meeting concluded, Olivia remained behind, studying the system architecture displayed on the main screen. Her wrists throbbed beneath the bandages, a physical reminder of why this work mattered. David approached quietly. "You know, most people would have responded to what happened with anger. Perhaps litigation. Few would have channeled it into creating a solution with industry-wide implications." Olivia considered this, her expression thoughtful rather than pleased by the compliment. "Anger doesn't solve systematic problems," she replied, "and I'm more interested in preventing the next incident than punishing the last one." David nodded thoughtfully. "Your mother would be proud." "Yes," Olivia agreed, touching the pilot wings pinned to her collar. "She always said the best response to being told you don't belong somewhere is to change the definition of belonging." As they left the technical center, the Fairflight algorithm continued its development lines of code, evolving into a system that would fundamentally transform not just Skyway Airlines but eventually the entire aviation industry. What had begun as a traumatic, humiliating incident was becoming something more, a catalyst for innovation, a template for reform, and a powerful reminder that sometimes progress comes not through gradual evolution, but through the determined response to moments of crisis. And it all traced back to those bleeding wrists and the quiet dignity of a 17-year-old who refused to accept that injustice was simply the cost of existing while Black in America. Rebecca's reckoning, the Federal Aviation Administration hearing room, fell into hushed silence as Rebecca Morrison was sworn in. The wood-paneled chamber, designed to evoke judicial gravitas, was filled to capacity with federal investigators, airline representatives, media observers, and civil rights advocates. At precisely 9 a.m., 7 days after the incident that had transformed her from anonymous flight attendant to the public face of discrimination, Rebecca faced the consequences of her actions. Her once confident posture had collapsed into itself, shoulders hunched as though trying to become invisible. FAA Administrator Angela Torres, a formidable Hispanic woman with 3 decades of aviation oversight experience, addressed the assembly. Unlike Rebecca's shrinking presence, Torres occupied space with the assured confidence of someone who had earned her authority through excellence rather than intimidation. These proceedings will determine whether federal regulations regarding passenger civil rights were violated during the incident involving Olivia Jackson on Skyway Flight 1326. She began, her tone making it clear this was no mere formality. The findings will inform potential enforcement actions, policy reforms, and industry-wide directives. Rebecca sat stiffly at the respondents' table, flanked by Richard Baker, the employment attorney provided by Skyway's insurance carrier. Her once immaculate uniform had been replaced by a conservative Navy suit that seemed to swallow her diminished presence. Ms. Morrison, Administrator Torres continued, you are facing serious allegations of civil rights violations, passenger discrimination, evidence tampering, and contributing to physical harm of a minor. Do you understand these charges? Yes, ma'am, Rebecca replied, her voice barely audible. Gone was the sharp, authoritative tone she had used to question Olivia's presence in first class. In its place was the thin whisper of someone confronting consequences perhaps for the first time. The proceedings began with a methodical presentation of evidence. Video footage from multiple angles showed Rebecca questioning Olivia's first-class ticket, planting the false boarding pass, and initiating the security response that led to handcuffs being applied. Most damning was the complete timeline, the relentless escalation from initial suspicion to physical restraint, all based on nothing more than Rebecca's assumption that a young black woman didn't belong in first class. According to your own statement, Torres noted, reviewing the document with clinical precision, you were following security protocols for suspicious passengers. Can you identify which specific protocol authorized planting false evidence? Rebecca shifted uncomfortably, her fingers twisting the tissue in her hands until it shredded. I was concerned about potential fraud. Based on what evidence? Torres pressed, her tone remaining professional but unyielding. She didn't look like our typical first-class passenger, Rebecca admitted, the words hanging in the air like a confession. And what does a typical first-class passenger look like? Ms. Morrison? Rebecca had no answer that wouldn't further incriminate her. Her eyes dropped to the table. Unable to meet the administrator's steady gaze, the investigation turned to Rebecca's personnel file, revealing a pattern that had gone unchallenged for years. 17 previous complaints had been filed against her by minority passengers, all alleging similar treatment, unwarranted suspicion, public humiliation, selective enforcement of policies. All 17 complaints were dismissed as unsubstantiated by Chief Wilson, noted the investigator presenting the evidence. Her clinical tone made the conspiracy of silence all the more damning. I was just doing my job, Rebecca insisted, falling back on the defense that had failed throughout history. Your job was ensuring passenger safety, Administrator Torres countered, not causing physical harm to a 17-year-old girl who had a valid ticket and posed no threat whatsoever. The medical evidence was presented next clinical photographs of Olivia's injured wrists, the surgical stitches required to close the deeper lacerations, the bandages stained with blood. Rebecca visibly flinched at the images, seeing for the first time the full extent of the physical damage her actions had caused. These injuries, Torres noted, resulted directly from handcuffs applied at your instruction and left in place despite the visible bleeding and Ms. Jackson's repeated statements that they were too tight. Throughout the proceedings, Rebecca's defenses crumbled, one by one. Her claim of following protocol was disproven by Skyway's actual documentation. Her assertion of suspecting fraud was contradicted by verification records showing Olivia's ticket had been confirmed as legitimate multiple times. Her insistence that she hadn't intended harm was undermined by witness statements describing her satisfied expression as Olivia was led away in handcuffs. Most devastating was the moment Rebecca was shown the complete footage of her actions from multiple angles simultaneously. 6 different camera perspectives displayed on the chamber's screens, the terminal security cameras, passenger videos, the aircraft's internal monitoring system, all capturing her deliberate escalation and apparent satisfaction as events unfolded. That's not, I didn't realize, Rebecca faltered, seeing herself through others' eyes for the first time. The confident authority figure who had orchestrated Olivia's humiliation now appeared small and cruel, her actions impossible to justify even to herself. Ms. Morrison, Administrator Torres said with clinical precision, the evidence demonstrates that you deliberately discriminated against a passenger based on race, fabricated evidence to justify your actions, and initiated a security response that resulted in physical injury to a minor. These actions violated multiple federal aviation regulations and potentially several civil rights statutes. The findings were delivered with inescapable clarity. Rebecca had violated FAA regulations regarding equitable passenger treatment. She had abused her authority as a representative of the airline. She had contributed directly to physical harm of a passenger. Employment termination is the minimum consequence, Torres concluded. Your aviation service credential is hereby revoked, and this case will be referred to the Department of Justice for a consideration of criminal charges. Rebecca's professional life ended with the stroke of a pen. 15 years as a flight attendant, her airline career, her certification all gone because she couldn't accept that a young black woman belonged in first class. As the hearing concluded, Rebecca was asked if she wished to make a statement. For a moment, it seemed she might maintain her defensive posture, continue insisting she had merely been doing her job or following protocols. Instead, something shifted in her expression as she finally confronted the full weight of her actions. I was wrong, she said simply. I saw Olivia Jackson's skin color and made assumptions that had no basis in reality. I escalated a situation that never should have existed. I caused harm that can never be fully undone. She paused, seeming to search for words adequate to the moment. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, to erase the physical scars on Olivia's wrists or the psychological impact of public humiliation. But it was the beginning of something that might eventually matter: recognition of the fundamental wrongness at the heart of what had occurred. As Rebecca left the hearing room, no longer an airline employee, no longer certified to work in commercial aviation, she passed a wall of photographs displaying milestones in transportation history. Among them was an image of Diana Jackson in her pilot's uniform, one of the pioneering black female commercial pilots whose daughter Rebecca had deemed suspicious simply for sitting in first class. The irony was lost on no one. Outside the FAA building, civil rights advocates spoke to assembled reporters about the systemic implications of the case. This wasn't just about one flight attendant's bias, they emphasized. This was about the structures that had enabled and protected that bias until it resulted in a teenager bleeding in handcuffs. The ripples from Rebecca's reckoning were already spreading beyond her individual case. The FAA announced a comprehensive review of passenger treatment standards across all commercial carriers. The Department of Transportation expanded its investigation into demographic-based passenger flagging systems. Industry publications began questioning the unofficial but pervasive practices that had gone unchallenged for decades. What had begun with one flight attendant's prejudice was evolving into a wholesale re-examination of who belonged in which spaces within commercial aviation and who had the authority to make those determinations. For Rebecca Morrison, the personal consequences were only beginning. Her name and face were now associated with one of the most visible instances of discrimination in recent memory. Her future employment prospects in any customer service field were effectively nullified. Her actions would be studied in training programs as the quintessential example of how bias becomes harm. But perhaps the most significant consequence was one that wouldn't be visible in hearings or regulatory findings. Rebecca would have to live with the knowledge that her assumptions, her prejudice, her need to police who belonged in which spaces had resulted in physical wounds that would leave permanent scars on a 17-year-old's wrists. Some reckonings couldn't be measured in professional certifications revoked or employment terminated. Some reckonings occurred in the private moments when one finally saw oneself clearly and recognized the damage done by believing that dignity was something that could be distributed selectively based on appearance. As Rebecca left the federal building, a reporter called out a final question. What would you say to Olivia Jackson if you could speak to her now? Rebecca paused, considering carefully before responding. I would tell her that she always belonged exactly where she was sitting. It was I who didn't belong in the position of power I abused. It wasn't redemption. Redemption would require much more than words. But it was, perhaps, the first step on a much longer journey from prejudice to understanding, a journey that Rebecca Morrison was only beginning as she walked away from the career she had destroyed through her own actions. Behind her, the federal investigation continued, expanding beyond one incident to examine the systems that had made it possible and to ensure that no other passenger would pay for their right to dignity with their own blood. Harvard Resolution. The Harvard University Admissions Office maintained the same timeless elegance it had possessed for generations. Oak-paneled walls lined with portraits of distinguished alumni created an atmosphere of scholarly gravitas. Yet today, 14 days after the incident that had prevented her original interview, Olivia Jackson brought something new into this rarefied space, a first-hand understanding of how systems fail those they claim to serve. Ms. Jackson, greeted Dr. Elizabeth Foster, the 59-year-old admissions director, whose silver-streaked hair and wire-rimmed glasses completed her image as the quintessential academic gatekeeper. "We're so pleased you could reschedule your interview. Thank you for the accommodation," Olivia replied with characteristic poise, consciously resisting the urge to tug at the sleeves covering her healing wrists. Unlike many applicants who radiated nervous energy, Olivia carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had already faced a far more intimidating evaluation. Dr. Foster's expression softened slightly. "Under the circumstances, it was the least we could do." The circumstances had become international news, a viral phenomenon that had transformed Olivia from anonymous applicant to symbol of resilience against systemic discrimination. The bandages might be hidden beneath her sleeves today, but everyone in the room was acutely aware of what they represented. "I've reviewed your application materials," noted Dr. James Wilson, the 64-year-old engineering professor who had joined the interview panel. His bushy eyebrows rose appreciatively as he consulted his notes. "Your academic credentials are, frankly, extraordinary. Perfect SAT scores, Regional Robotics Championship, Advanced Calculus Research Project. But I'm particularly interested in this algorithm you've developed." Olivia nodded, reaching into her messenger bag, the same one that had been roughly searched and emptied by Rebecca Morrison 2 weeks earlier. From it, she withdrew a tablet containing her presentation. "The project began as a theoretical framework for identifying discriminatory patterns in transportation systems," she explained, her voice steady as she displayed the first slides. "Recent events have accelerated its practical application." The understatement hung in the air between them, the clinical reference to recent events, encompassing handcuffs, blood, public humiliation, and a viral video seen by millions. "I understand Skyway Airlines is already implementing your system," Dr. Wilson noted with undisguised interest. His tone carried the excitement of an academic recognizing groundbreaking work. "The first phase went live yesterday," Olivia confirmed. "Full implementation is scheduled within 60 days. Dr. Foster leaned forward slightly. "And the algorithm? It would have prevented what happened to you." "Yes," Olivia replied simply. "It would have flagged the discriminatory pattern within the first 3 interactions, long before the situation escalated to physical restraint." The presentation continued, Olivia outlining the technical specifications with remarkable clarity and precision. The FairFlight system wasn't just a response to personal trauma, it was a sophisticated technological solution to a pervasive social problem, applying engineering principles to human behavior monitoring. "The implications extend well beyond aviation," she concluded. "Similar frameworks could be applied to any system where human discretion creates opportunities for bias education, healthcare, law enforcement, housing, including university admissions," Dr. Foster noted perceptively, her gaze sharpening with professional interest. "Potentially," Olivia agreed, "any system where subjective decision-making affects access to resources or opportunities could benefit from bias detection protocols." Wilson exchanged glances with his colleagues. "Ms. Jackson, sometimes the most compelling qualifications come through unexpected challenges. Your response to what must have been a traumatic experience demonstrates exactly the kind of innovative thinking and resilience we value at Harvard." As the interview continued, Olivia addressed questions about her academic goals, research interests, and long-term aspirations. Throughout, she maintained the same composed dignity that had carried her through handcuffs and public humiliation, neither leveraging sympathy nor minimizing the significance of what had occurred. "I noticed you're wearing pilot wings," Dr. Foster commented near the end of the session, indicating the small gold pin on Olivia's blazer lapel. "They belonged to my mother," Olivia explained. She was one of the first black female commercial pilots for a major airline. "Following in her footsteps?" Dr. Wilson asked. Olivia considered this, her answer revealing thoughtful depth rather than practiced glibness. "Not exactly. She broke barriers by flying planes. I hope to break barriers by changing the systems that determine who gets to fly them and how they're treated when they do." When the formal interview concluded, Dr. Foster walked Olivia to the door. "Our scholarship decisions aren't finalized for another 2 weeks, but I feel confident in saying Harvard would be privileged to have a mind like yours contributing to our engineering department." "Thank you," Olivia replied, "though I hope you understand why I wouldn't want special consideration based on recent events." Dr. Foster studied her thoughtfully. "Ms. Jackson, recognizing exceptional potential isn't special consideration, it's the entire point of our selection process. Your response to adversity simply illuminated qualities that were already there." As Olivia left the admissions office, Wilson was already on the phone with the engineering department chair, discussing the potential implementation of her bias detection algorithm across Harvard's transportation and service systems. "It's remarkable," he explained excitedly. "The framework could be adapted to monitor everything from campus shuttle operations to dining hall service patterns. If there are systemic inequities in how we serve different student populations, this would identify them in real time." 2 days later, Olivia received the email she had been working towards since childhood, a full scholarship to Harvard's aerospace engineering program, with an additional research grant specifically allocated to further develop her algorithm. The official letter made no mention of bleeding wrists or viral videos. It recognized her exceptional academic achievements, innovative research approach, and potential contributions to the field. The only subtle acknowledgement of recent events came in a personal note from Dr. Foster. "Sometimes the most important innovations emerge from confronting systems that have failed us." When Marcus saw the acceptance letter, his pride was tempered with a father's complex emotions. "Harvard is lucky to have you," he said, embracing his daughter carefully to avoid pressing on her still healing wrists. "Though I wish the path had been different." "The path is never what we expect," Olivia replied, echoing her mother's favorite saying. "It's what we do with the unexpected turns that matters." That evening, as Olivia updated her presentation materials to include recent developments, she paused to examine her wrists. The bandages had been removed, revealing the healing wounds beneath pink surgical scars that would eventually fade to thin white lines. Permanent reminders of a moment when she had been deemed suspicious simply for existing in a space someone decided she didn't belong. "The scars tell a story," she murmured to herself, gently tracing the marks with her fingertip. "But they don't get to determine how it ends." She returned to her work, refining the algorithm that would help ensure other passengers never paid for their dignity with their own blood. In transforming her trauma into innovation, Olivia had not only secured her academic future, but had also created something that would long outlast the scars on her wrists, a system designed to recognize and prevent the very biases that had caused them. Harvard had gained not just an exceptional student, but a catalyst for institutional transformation. The same determination that had maintained Olivia's composure through public humiliation would now be channeled into reshaping systems that had failed generations of people who looked like her. And it had all begun with handcuffs cutting into the wrists of a 17-year-old who refused to accept that injustice was simply the cost of existing while black in America. Part 5, The Transformation. The Grand Hall of the Federal Aviation Administration headquarters in Washington, D.C. buzzed with unprecedented activity. 30 days after the incident that had transformed commercial aviation, industry leaders gathered for what many were already calling the most significant regulatory shift in decades. Transportation Secretary William Peterson, a distinguished Caucasian man whose salt and pepper hair belied his youthful energy at 58, addressed the assembled executives and regulators. "Today marks a fundamental reimagining of passenger rights protection," he began, his voice carrying through the hall with practiced authority. "The standards we are implementing, which will henceforth be known as the Jackson Standards, represent not merely a response to a single incident, but a comprehensive framework for ensuring equitable treatment across all commercial carriers. On the massive screen behind him, statistics from the first month of Fair Flight implementation at Skyway Airlines told a compelling story. Reported discrimination incidents had decreased by 47%. Customer satisfaction scores had increased across all demographics, but most dramatically among passengers of color. Perhaps most significantly, operational efficiency had actually improved once the friction of discriminatory practices was removed. Gabriela Martinez, the 52-year-old president of the Airline Industry Association, initially approached the podium with visible skepticism. Her organization had initially pushed back against the accelerated implementation timeline and associated costs. When these reforms were first proposed, she acknowledged candidly, many in our industry viewed them as an overreaction to an isolated incident. We were concerned about implementation costs, operational disruptions, and unrealistic timelines. She paused, glancing toward Marcus and Olivia Jackson seated in the front row. We were wrong. She continued with unexpected candor. The data from Skyway's initial implementation is unambiguous. These standards not only reduce discrimination, but actually enhance operational efficiency and customer satisfaction. The business case is as compelling as the moral imperative. Not everyone shared this enthusiasm. Several smaller carriers continued to argue for extended timelines, citing resource limitations and technical challenges. One executive questioned whether the standards represented an undue regulatory burden in response to what he characterized as an unfortunate but isolated incident. Sofia Alvarez, the Department of Transportation investigator who had helped expose the systemic nature of passenger profiling, addressed this objection directly. Our investigation has identified similar discriminatory flagging systems at 27 major carriers, she explained, displaying evidence compiled over the past month. Her rapid-fire delivery left no room for equivocation or denial. This was never about one incident or one airline. The bleeding handcuffs simply made visible what had been normalized across the industry. The implementation roadmap was ambitious but clear. Immediate elimination of all demographic-based passenger flagging systems, 60-day implementation of bias, detection algorithms modeled on the Fair Flight system, mandatory transparency dashboards showing real-time equity metrics at all carriers, comprehensive staff, retraining with emphasis on recognizing and preventing unconscious bias, independent monitoring and quarterly compliance reporting to federal authorities. Early adoption incentives will be available, Secretary Peterson explained. Tax benefits, regulatory streamlining, and priority route approvals for carriers that implement the full protocol ahead of schedule. As the formal presentation concluded, discussion shifted to the technical aspects of implementation. While Skyway had developed the original Fair Flight algorithm, the standardized version would be available to all carriers, a decision Marcus Jackson had made despite the potential competitive advantage of keeping it proprietary. This was never about market share, Marcus explained when questioned about this choice. This is about ensuring that what happened to my daughter never happens to anyone else's child, regardless of which airline they choose to fly. The transformation extended beyond policies and algorithms to physical changes in airports themselves. Transparent processing areas replaced secluded detention rooms. Body cameras with tamper-evident indicators became standard for all security personnel. Bias detection monitors displayed real-time fairness scores that passengers could view, creating accountability through visibility. Olivia Jackson, whose Harvard acceptance had been announced the previous week, had been invited to address the implementation team regarding the technical specifications of the system she had designed. The algorithm isn't designed to eliminate human judgment, she explained to the assembled engineers and administrators. Unlike her father's commanding presence, Olivia's authority came from intellectual precision and clarity. It's designed to ensure that judgment is applied consistently regardless of a passenger's appearance. Her presentation was remarkable, not just for its technical sophistication, but for the authority with which she delivered it, a 17-year-old instructing veteran industry professionals on how to identify and prevent the very biases that had resulted in her bleeding wrists just a month earlier. The system operates on 3 core principles, she continued, echoing her original explanation to Skyway's technical team. Detection, intervention, and adaptation. It identifies potential bias in real time, allows for immediate course correction, and continuously learns from new data to improve accuracy. What had begun as a Harvard application project was now being implemented across one of America's largest industries, a transformation driven not by gradual evolution, but by the stark evidence of handcuffs cutting into a teenager's flesh. As the implementation conference concluded, early data from the expanded rollout was already proving compelling. The first 7 airlines to adopt the standards reported significant improvements across all metrics. Discrimination complaints down 43%, customer satisfaction up 27% among minority passengers, security processing time reduced by 12% due to elimination of unnecessary random screenings, employee satisfaction increased by 19% as staff reported less conflict and clearer guidelines. The Jackson standards represent the most significant advancement in passenger rights protection in 25 years. Secretary Peterson declared in his closing remarks, "What began as a response to injustice has evolved into a template for how industries can address systemic bias through technology, transparency, and accountability." For Olivia, watching from the audience as her algorithm was codified into federal regulation, the moment carried complex emotions. The scars on her wrists, now healing but still visible, had become the catalyst for change that would affect millions of travelers. Her personal trauma had been transformed into public policy. As the conference dispersed, Gabriela Martinez approached Olivia privately. "I have a 17-year-old daughter," she said quietly, her professional demeanor softening into maternal empathy. "When I saw that video, your wrist bleeding from those handcuffs, I couldn't stop thinking about her. How any of our children could be treated that way simply because of how they look." Olivia nodded, understanding the personal evolution behind the professional pivot. "That's why the algorithm matters," she replied. "Because when systems fail, it's always someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's parent who bears the cost." As they left the FAA headquarters, Marcus and Olivia passed a wall where workers were installing a new plaque. Though only partially completed, the title was already visible. "The Jackson Standards Ensuring Dignity for All Passengers." Marcus paused, studying the words with a father's complex pride recognition of his daughter's impact, tempered by awareness of the price she had paid for it. "Mom would like that," Olivia said quietly, standing beside him. "Dignity for all passengers. That's what she always fought for." Marcus nodded, placing his arm gently around his daughter's shoulders. "She would be prouder of you than words could express." As they walked toward their waiting car, the transformation they had catalyzed continued unfolding behind them, rippling through an industry that would never be the same after a 17-year-old's blood had made visible what had long been hidden in plain sight. The Jackson standards weren't just changing how airlines operated, they were changing who got to fly with dignity. Personal healing. 45 days after handcuffs had cut into her wrists, Olivia Jackson sat on the back deck of her family home, watching the sun set over suburban Atlanta. The physical wounds had healed enough that bandages were no longer necessary, though the scars remained visible, the pink lines encircling both wrists like permanent bracelets. The door slid open as Marcus joined her, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate, a family tradition since Olivia was small. He handed one to his daughter before settling into the adjacent chair, the ceramic warmth a small comfort against the evening's growing chill. "How are they feeling?" he asked, nodding toward her wrists. "Better," Olivia replied, rotating her hands to examine the healing skin. "The doctor says the redness should fade within a few months. The scars will always be there, though." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Some marks we carry forever." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky transformed from blue to gold to deepening purple. In the distance, the contrail of a passenger jet caught the last rays of sunlight, a silent reminder of the industry their family had helped build and was now helping transform. "Sometimes I still feel them," Olivia admitted quietly. "The handcuffs. Even when I'm not thinking about what happened, my body remembers." "The body remembers what the mind tries to forget," Marcus replied, the low rumble of his voice carrying the weight of ancestral wisdom. It was something Diana used to say when discussing her own experiences as a pioneering Black female pilot. The slights, the doubts, the constant need to prove herself worthy of the cockpit. Her mind might have moved forward, but her body carried the tension of those battles. "I'm not angry," Olivia continued, seeming almost surprised by her own admission. "I thought I would be, but it's more determined. Like what happened wasn't just about me." "It wasn't," Marcus agreed. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't acknowledge your own pain in the midst of the larger significance. Olivia turned her wrists upward, examining the scars in the fading light. Mom faced discrimination too. Didn't she as a pilot? Every day, Marcus confirmed, memories surfacing in his eyes. Not always as dramatic as handcuffs, but constant. Passengers who refused to believe she was the captain. Colleagues who questioned her qualifications. Systems designed with the assumption that pilots looked a certain way and it wasn't like her. How did she handle it? Olivia's question carried the weight of someone seeking guidance across generations. Marcus smiled, memories of Diana flooding back with bittersweet clarity. Your mother had this remarkable ability to transform frustration into focus. She once told me, every time someone doubts I belong in the cockpit, I fly that plane with such precision that their doubt indicts them. Not me. Olivia touched her mother's pilot wings, pinned as always to her collar. I wish she could see what's happening now. The algorithm, the Jackson standards, Harvard. She sees, Marcus said softly, and she'd be so proud of how you've handled yourself. Not just maintaining your composure during the incident, but what you've done with it afterward. Olivia sipped her hot chocolate, letting the familiar comfort wash over her. The algorithm deployment is proceeding faster than projected. 22 airlines have now implemented the core modules. That's not what I meant, Marcus gently corrected. I'm proud of the technical achievements, of course, but I'm more proud of who you've remained through all of this thoughtful, measured, focused on solutions rather than retribution. Olivia was quiet for a moment, her gaze following another aircraft as it climbed into the darkening sky. There are times I am angry, she finally admitted, not just about what happened to me, but knowing it happens to people every day who don't have a CEO father or a viral video to demand accountability. That anger isn't wrong, Marcus assured her. It's what you do with it that matters. As darkness settled around them, Olivia rolled up her sleeves, fully exposing the scars that she usually kept covered in public. In the privacy of their home, with only her father as witness, she could acknowledge their reality without becoming defined by them. The Harvard doctor suggested reconstructive options, she noted, treatments that might make them less visible. And what did you tell her? Marcus asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. That I'm not ready to decide yet. The scars remind us where we've been, but they don't dictate where we're going. Marcus recognized Diana's words, another piece of her wisdom that had survived to guide their daughter. Your mother would agree. They lapsed into comfortable silence, the bond between them strengthened by shared purpose. For Marcus, the incident had crystallized what mattered most, not the airline empire he had built, but ensuring his daughter could move through the world with the dignity she deserved. For Olivia, it had accelerated her evolution from student to innovator, transforming academic theories into real-world solutions. I've been thinking about next steps, Olivia said after a while. Beyond aviation, the same principles could be applied to other systems. Healthcare, education, housing. One industry at a time, Marcus advised with a smile that softened his serious features. You still have to finish high school before revolutionizing all of American society. Olivia laughed, a sound that had become more frequent as the weeks passed and healing progressed. Fair point. As they prepared to head inside, Olivia paused, her expression turning serious again. Dad, thank you for teaching me that my dignity isn't determined by how others treat me. I don't think I fully understood what that meant until I was sitting in that security office with bleeding wrists, still knowing my worth hadn't changed despite how they saw me. Marcus embraced his daughter carefully, mindful of her healing wrists. That strength was always yours, Olivia. It's your mother's legacy living through you. I just helped you recognize it. Above them, another aircraft crossed the night sky, its lights blinking steadily. On board, passengers of all backgrounds were experiencing the early implementations of the Jackson standards, flying with the dignity that Diana had fought for and that Olivia had finally helped codify into systems and policies. The scars on her wrists would remain, but they had already been transformed from symbols of injustice to catalysts for change. In the alchemy of healing, Olivia Jackson had turned wounds into wisdom and trauma into transformation. As father and daughter went inside, the empty mugs of hot chocolate left behind. They carried with them not just the memory of what had happened, but the knowledge of what it had begun a reckoning long overdue and a reimagining of what equality could look like when embedded into the very systems that had once enforced its absence. Or in Rebecca's redemption. The South Atlanta Community Center was a far cry from the sleek airport terminals where Rebecca Morrison had spent her career. The concrete building with its faded murals and fluorescent lighting bore no resemblance to the first-class cabins where she had once wielded authority with such casual cruelty. 90 days after handcuffing Olivia Jackson until she bled, Rebecca stood before a group of teenagers in the center's multipurpose room. Her designer uniform was gone, replaced by modest business casual that seemed to hang on her frame. The confident, sometimes arrogant demeanor that had characterized her interactions with passengers had given way to something more tentative, more thoughtful. "My name is Rebecca Morrison," she began, her voice steady despite her obvious discomfort. "And I'm here as part of my journey to understand the biases that led me to harm someone who had done nothing wrong." The Youth Aviation Program, directed by Miguel Ramirez, a passionate 42-year-old Hispanic man with 2 decades of experience in education, provided exposure to aviation careers for students from underserved communities. Many of the teens seated before Rebecca aspired to become pilots, engineers, air traffic controllers, to claim spaces in an industry that had not always welcomed people who looked like them. 3 months ago, I was a senior flight attendant for a major airline," Rebecca continued, her words emerging with a deliberate care that had been absent in her confrontation with Olivia. "Today, I am legally barred from working in commercial aviation. My career ended because I saw a young black woman in first class and automatically assumed she didn't belong there." The room was silent. Some of the students exchanged glances, recognizing the reference to a viral incident they had likely seen online. "I've completed a federal bias recognition program," Rebecca explained, "but education means nothing without application. Director Ramirez has allowed me to speak with you as part of my commitment to turning understanding into action." Miguel Ramirez stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral. This arrangement hadn't been his idea initially. When Rebecca had contacted him about volunteer opportunities, his first instinct had been refusal. Why expose vulnerable students to someone with a documented history of discrimination? But something in her letter had given him pause, not excuses or self-pity, but genuine acknowledgement and a desire to repair harm through meaningful action rather than empty apologies. "The system I enforced wasn't created by me," Rebecca told the students, "but I became its willing instrument. I applied policies selectively based on who I thought looked right in certain spaces. I never questioned why our passenger flagging system disproportionately targeted people of color." A young woman in the front row raised her hand, her expression skeptical. "But you knew what you were doing was wrong, right? You planted evidence. That wasn't just following policy." Rebecca nodded, accepting the direct challenge without defensiveness. "You're absolutely right. That crossed the line from unconscious biases to deliberate misconduct. I created a justification for what I'd already decided, that Ms. Jackson didn't belong in first class. Because she was black," another student stated bluntly, his tone challenging rather than questioning. "Yes," Rebecca acknowledged, meeting his gaze directly. "Because she was black and young, and I had internalized assumptions about who belongs in premium spaces." The conversation grew more specific as Rebecca outlined exactly how bias had infected airline operations, from the coded language and security protocols to the discretionary enforcement of policies that appeared neutral on paper but were applied discriminatorily in practice. The R7 code that flagged Ms. Jackson's ticket for additional verification was technically about fraud prevention, Rebecca explained, her voice taking on the cadence of confession. But in practice, it was applied almost exclusively to passengers of color in premium cabins. We never flagged elderly white passengers or business executives with the same scrutiny. As the session progressed, Rebecca moved from acknowledgement to advocacy, sharing information about the new Jackson standards and what they meant for industry accountability. Her insider knowledge provided valuable context for students interested in aviation careers, not just about the discrimination that had existed, but about the transformation now underway. "The passenger flagging systems that I helped enforce are being dismantled," she explained. "I'm working with regulatory authorities to identify similar mechanisms that may exist in other airlines' operations. This was the unexpected turn in Rebecca's journey from perpetrator to reluctant whistleblower. After her termination in federal hearing, she had made the difficult decision to cooperate fully with investigations, providing detailed testimony about discriminatory practices that might otherwise have remained hidden. There's a difference between remorse and redemption, she told the students. Remorse is feeling bad about what you've done. Redemption is working to repair the harm and prevent similar harm in the future. After the formal presentation, Rebecca stayed to answer questions from individual students. Many were understandably skeptical of her transformation, asking pointed questions about her previous behavior and current motivations. "How do we know you're not just doing this to make yourself feel better?" asked a perceptive young man who aspired to become an aerospace engineer. "You don't," Rebecca admitted, her candor replacing the defensive self-justification that had characterized her early responses to scrutiny. "And honestly, I ask myself the same question. That's why measurable actions matter more than intentions or feelings. The test isn't how sorry I am, it's what I do with that sorrow." As the session concluded, Miguel approached Rebecca with measured assessment. "You handled their questions well, especially the difficult ones. They deserve honesty," Rebecca replied, "particularly since many of them will face the same systems of exclusion that I helped enforce." Miguel studied her for a moment. "There's something I've been considering. Ms. Jackson will be visiting our program next month to discuss her algorithm project. Would you be open to a moderated conversation with her? It could be valuable for the students to witness." Rebecca's composure faltered for the first time. "I don't know if she would want that, or if it would be appropriate for me to ask it of her. I'll speak with her first, of course," Miguel clarified. "But healing often requires conversation, not just parallel monologues." The possibility hung in the air between them, not forgiveness or friendship, but perhaps something equally valuable, the chance to transform a moment of cruelty into an opportunity for educational growth. As Rebecca gathered her materials, she noticed a bulletin board displaying student achievements. Among them was a news clipping about Olivia Jackson's Harvard scholarship and the Fairflight algorithm that was transforming aviation. The juxtaposition was stark. The person Rebecca had harmed was now reshaping the industry that had ejected Rebecca for that very harm. There was a symmetry to it, a balance that felt appropriate rather than unfair. Outside the community center, Rebecca passed a playground where children of various backgrounds played together without the artificial barriers adults so often constructed. She paused, watching them navigate shared space with unconscious equity. Her phone buzzed with a notification from the bias recognition app that was part of her mandated training program. The daily prompt asked, "What assumption did you question today?" Rebecca thought about the teenagers in the aviation program, their ambitions, their intelligence, their right to pursue any career without biased gatekeepers determining where they belonged. She typed her response, "I questioned whether my journey from harm to healing is about me at all. Perhaps my role now is simply to serve as a case study in accountability, to demonstrate that systems can change when individuals within them are held responsible for their actions." As she walked to her car, a modest used sedan that had replaced the luxury vehicle her airline salary had once afforded, Rebecca reflected on how completely her life had changed in 90 days. Career ended, professional reputation destroyed, financial security evaporated. Yet alongside these losses had come something unexpected, a growing clarity about the person she had been and the person she might yet become. The mandatory bias training had evolved from punishment to pathway, opening her eyes to patterns she had never questioned and assumptions she had treated as truth. Rebecca Morrison would never again work in aviation. She would never wear a flight attendant's uniform or determine who belonged in which cabin. But perhaps she could help ensure that the next generation entered an industry where belonging was determined by tickets, not appearance, and where dignity was considered every passenger's right rather than a privilege distributed based on skin color. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. Redemption would require sustained effort beyond mandatory programs and community service. But it was a beginning, a first step on a much longer journey from enforcing bias to exposing and eliminating it. As Rebecca drove away from the community center, she passed a Skyway Airlines billboard displaying their new tagline, "Dignity is every passenger's right." The irony wasn't lost on her former employer now advertising the very principle her actions had violated. Sometimes transformation required blood to make injustice visible. Rebecca's role now was to ensure that Olivia Jackson's blood hadn't been shed in vain. Part 6, The Resolution. Aerospace Engineering 101 Foundational Principles, announced Professor Martin as Olivia settled into her seat near the front of the lecture hall. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows of the Harvard University Engineering Building, casting golden rectangles across the polished wooden floors. It was the first day of classes, 4 months after handcuffs had cut into Olivia's wrists at Atlanta International Airport. The scars remained visible, thin lines of slightly darker skin that circled both wrists like permanent bracelets, but Olivia no longer felt compelled to hide them beneath long sleeves or bangles. "I'm Zoe Richardson," whispered the young white woman who took the seat beside her. "Freshman from Seattle." "Olivia Jackson," she replied with a smile. "Atlanta." Recognition flickered across Zoe's face, the moment of connection between Olivia's name and the viral video that had transformed commercial aviation. To her credit, Zoe didn't immediately mention it, focusing instead on unpacking her tablet and stylus. Professor Martin began his introductory lecture, outlining the course structure and expectations. Olivia took meticulous notes, falling easily into the student role that felt simultaneously familiar and brand new. 4 rows behind her, several students were surreptitiously taking photos not of the professor, but of her. Fame was an unexpected complication of her Harvard experience. The bleeding handcuffs incident had made Olivia recognizable in ways that sometimes felt intrusive. Strangers approached her in dining halls and campus walkways, often wanting to share their own experiences with discrimination or express solidarity. "For your first assignment," Professor Martins announced, "you'll work in pairs to identify an aerospace engineering challenge with significant social impact potential. Consider how technology can address inequities in access, safety, or resource distribution." Zoe turned to Olivia. "Partners." "Sure," Olivia agreed, appreciating the straightforward approach. After class, they found a quiet corner of the campus center to discuss potential project ideas. "I was thinking about emergency response drones for remote communities," Zoe suggested. "Areas where traditional medical services are difficult to access." "That's a solid concept," Olivia nodded. "I've been exploring how bias detection algorithms might be adapted for autonomous flight systems." There it was, the inevitable connection to her pre-Harvard experience. Zoe hesitated briefly before responding. "Your algorithm is already being implemented in airlines, right? I read about the Jackson standards in my ethics in engineering seminar." 27 carriers so far," Olivia confirmed. "Full industry implementation expected within 18 months. That's incredible," Zoe said sincerely. "To create something with that kind of impact before even starting college." Olivia touched her wrist unconsciously, a gesture that had become habitual when discussing the algorithm. "It wasn't how I planned to launch my engineering career." "I saw the video," Zoe admitted. "When it happened, it was one of those moments that makes you question everything you thought you knew about how systems work." Their conversation was interrupted by a teaching assistant who approached their table with barely contained excitement. "Ms. Jackson, Professor Hendricks was hoping you might guest lecture in his Ethics of Innovation course next week. He's using your case study as part of the curriculum." This too had become part of Olivia's Harvard experience, faculty members integrating her story and technical solution into their teaching. It was flattering but sometimes disorienting to be simultaneously student and subject matter. "I'll check my schedule," she promised diplomatically. As the weeks progressed, Olivia found her rhythm at Harvard. Her technical abilities quickly established her as a standout student, while her practical experience with the Fairflight implementation gave her insights that even professors found valuable. The algorithm itself continued to evolve, with research teams at multiple universities now contributing to its development. What had begun as Olivia's response to personal trauma had expanded into a collaborative project spanning disciplines from computer science to sociology. In early October, Olivia established the Jackson Equity in Engineering Scholarship, a program specifically supporting minority women pursuing STEM degrees. Using a portion of the settlement funds from Skyway Airlines, which Marcus had insisted she accept despite her initial reluctance, she created a pathway for students whose brilliance might otherwise go unrecognized. "It's not enough to open doors," she explained at the scholarship launch. "We need to ensure that talent isn't blocked by biased gatekeepers before even reaching those doors." Her mother's pilot wings, still pinned to her collar daily, became the emblem for a new student organization, Pioneers in Technical Spaces. The group brought together students from underrepresented backgrounds across engineering disciplines, creating community and mentorship networks that help navigate environments not always designed with them in mind. As midterms approached, Professor Martin asked Olivia to remain after class one afternoon. "I've been reviewing your project with Ms. Richardson," he began. "The integration of bias detection principles into autonomous flight systems is genuinely innovative. Have you considered publishing your findings?" "We're still refining the methodology," Olivia replied modestly. "Well, when you're ready, I'd be happy to co-author," he offered. "This work deserves wider academic attention." Walking across Harvard Yard after the conversation, Olivia reflected on how differently her academic journey had unfolded than she had imagined. The bleeding wrist that had prevented her original interview had ultimately shaped not just her personal path, but the trajectory of an entire industry. Her phone chimed with a text from Marcus. Fair flight implementation data showing 62% reduction in reported discrimination incidents across participating carriers. Your algorithm is changing lives. Olivia smiled, tracing the scars on her wrists in what had become an unconscious gesture of reflection. The wounds had healed, but their impact continued expanding in ways she could never have anticipated when handcuffs had cut into her flesh 4 months earlier. As she entered her dormitory, Zoe called out from the common room where several students were gathered around a laptop. "Olivia, come see this." On the screen was a demonstration of the latest Fairflight dashboard, a public interface showing real-time equity metrics across major airlines. Green indicators dominated the display, with occasional yellow warnings prompting immediate intervention protocols. "They're implementing this at Logan next week," one student explained. "All passenger processing systems will be integrated with bias detection algorithms." Olivia watched quietly as her classmates discussed the technical aspects of the system she had designed, now analyzing millions of interactions daily across dozens of airports. What had begun as a Harvard application project had transformed into an industry standard. Later that evening, alone in her room, Olivia updated her project journal, a detailed record of the algorithm's evolution that had expanded far beyond its original scope. The latest entry noted adaptation protocols for healthcare settings, where similar patterns of discriminatory treatment had been documented. On her desk sat a framed photograph of Diana Jackson in her pilot's uniform, standing proudly beside the aircraft she commanded. Beside it was a more recent image, Olivia at the Federal Aviation Administration headquarters as the Jackson standards were officially adopted. Mother and daughter, separated by time but united in purpose, both transforming an industry that had initially questioned their very right to occupy space within it. "One system at a time, Mom," Olivia whispered to the photograph. "Just like you taught me." Airport returned 6 months to the day after handcuffs had cut into her wrists. Olivia Jackson stood once again in Terminal B of Atlanta International Airport. The space was simultaneously familiar and transformed the same soaring architecture and bustling crowds, but with visible changes that reflected the systemic reforms her ordeal had triggered. Gone were the secluded security offices where she had been detained out of public view. In their place stood transparent processing areas with clear glass walls, accountability through visibility. Security personnel now wore body cameras with indicator lights confirming they were operational. Monitors displayed real-time fairness scores across various passenger interactions. Olivia approached the Skyway Airlines counter, her Harvard backpack over one shoulder. The reservation system recognized her instantly, not because of her father's position, but through the standard verification protocols now applied identically to all passengers, regardless of appearance. "Good morning, Ms. Jackson," greeted Taylor Wilson, a 27-year-old white gate agent with a warm smile. "Checking in for Flight 1426 to Boston." "Yes," Olivia confirmed, presenting her ID with a calm that felt different than 6 months ago, no longer the forced composure of someone braced for discrimination, but the natural ease of someone expecting professional treatment. Taylor processed the check-in efficiently. No excessive scrutiny or suspicious questions. As she handed over the boarding pass, her eyes briefly flickered to the thin scars visible on Olivia's wrists. "I just wanted to say," Taylor began hesitantly, "the changes you helped implement have made a real difference. Not just for passengers, but for those of us working here too. The guidelines are clearer, the expectations more consistent." Olivia nodded, appreciating the sincere acknowledgement. "That's good to hear. The Fair Flight system even caught one of my own unconscious patterns last month," Taylor continued. I was consistently spending more time verifying certain passengers' documentation without realizing it. The algorithm flagged it before it became problematic. This was precisely what Olivia had designed the system to do, identify potential bias before it escalated to harmful action. Prevention rather than punishment. As she moved through the security checkpoint, Olivia noted the differences in process. TSA officers maintained professional demeanor with all passengers. The random selection for additional screening appeared genuinely random now, with analytics confirming proportional distribution across demographics. The terminal itself buzzed with the usual pre-flight activity, but with subtle differences. Passenger assistance stations displayed clear information about rights and reporting procedures. QR codes allowed immediate feedback on treatment. The entire environment had been reconfigured to prioritize transparency and accountability. Reaching Gate 32B, the same gate where Rebecca Morrison had questioned her first-class status 6 months earlier, Olivia paused briefly, absorbing the symmetry of the moment. The space looked different now. The gate desk had been redesigned with transparent screens visible to both agent and passenger. The boarding process displayed real-time metrics, ensuring equitable treatment across passenger categories. As boarding began for first class, Olivia joined the line without hesitation. No one questioned her presence or subjected her to additional scrutiny. The gate agent scanned her boarding pass with the same efficiency offered to every passenger, regardless of appearance. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Jackson," the flight attendant greeted as Olivia stepped onto the aircraft. No suspicion, no challenges, just the professional courtesy every passenger deserved. Settling into seat 3A, Olivia found a copy of Aviation Industry Today in the seat pocket. The cover story highlighted the transformation triggered by the Jackson standards, with metrics demonstrating dramatic improvements in passenger experience across all demographics. "The Aviation Equity Revolution," read the headline, "has redefined industry standards for passenger dignity." As other first-class passengers boarded, Olivia noted the visible diversity, a stark contrast to 6 months earlier, when she had been the only person of color in the premium cabin. The Fair Flight implementation had revealed previously invisible patterns of passenger steering, where subtle biases had influenced who was upgraded or directed to which sections of the aircraft. A flight attendant approached with a pre-departure beverage. "Water, please," Olivia requested. "Certainly," the attendant replied, serving the drink with the same courteous efficiency she displayed with all passengers. On her uniform lapel, Olivia noticed a small pin, the open skies symbol that had become the industry standard for commitment to equitable treatment. The gesture was small but significant, a visible reminder of the cultural shift underlying the systemic changes. As the aircraft prepared for departure, Olivia touched her mother's pilot wings. Still pinned to her collar after all these months, Diana Jackson had navigated discrimination in cockpits. Her daughter had transformed how passengers experienced the cabins. Different approaches to the same fundamental principle, that dignity wasn't determined by appearance. Through the window, Olivia watched ground crews preparing the aircraft for departure. The mechanics and technicians moved with practiced efficiency, their coordinated efforts ensuring safe travel for hundreds of passengers who would never know their names or see their faces. Systems working as designed, not perfect, perhaps, but accountable, transparent, and continuously improving. That had been the goal all along. As the engine spooled up for departure, Olivia touched her wrist scars briefly, a habitual gesture that connected past trauma to present progress. The wounds had healed, leaving marks that would always remain visible. But like the aviation industry itself, they had been transformed from symbols of injustice to catalysts for change. The aircraft lifted smoothly into the Georgia sky, carrying Olivia back toward Harvard in the future she was building, not despite what had happened 6 months earlier, but partly because of it. The bleeding handcuffs that had nearly derailed her academic journey had ultimately expanded her impact far beyond what any scholarship or degree alone could have achieved. As Atlanta receded below, Olivia opened her laptop to review research data from the latest FairFlight implementation. The algorithm continued learning, adapting, and evolving, identifying patterns that might otherwise have remained invisible until they caused harm. The system wasn't perfect. No algorithm could eliminate human bias entirely, but it could make bias visible, actionable, and increasingly difficult to deny. It could ensure that dignity wasn't distributed selectively based on appearance. It could help transform industries one interaction at a time. 6 months ago, Olivia Jackson had boarded a flight and ended up in handcuffs because someone decided she didn't belong in first class. Today, she flew toward a future she was helping design, one where belonging wasn't determined by assumptions, where systems serve people rather than subjugating them, and where dignity was recognized as every passenger's right rather than a privilege selectively granted. The scars on her wrist would always tell the story of what had happened, but they no longer defined what was possible. Final meeting. The executive office at Skyway headquarters maintained its understated elegance, warm wood paneling, comfortable furnishings, and large windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. 1 year to the day after handcuffs had cut into Olivia Jackson's wrists, three people gathered around the conference table to mark a milestone none of them could have anticipated 12 months earlier. Marcus Jackson, as always, projected calm authority in his tailored suit. Olivia, home from Harvard for the occasion, wore her mother's pilot wings on the lapel of her blazer. Transportation Secretary William Peterson had flown in specifically for this meeting, the weight of federal authority evident in his bearing despite his friendly demeanor. The data is unambiguous, Secretary Peterson noted, reviewing the comprehensive analysis displayed on tablets before each of them. The Jackson standards have achieved an 82% reduction in discrimination incidents industry-wide within 12 months of implementation. The numbers told a compelling story. 47 major carriers had fully implemented the Fair Flight algorithm. 312 airports now operated with transparent processing protocols. Customer satisfaction scores had increased across all demographic groups. Operational efficiency had improved by 17% with the elimination of unnecessary security delays. What began as a response to a single incident has transformed into the most significant passenger rights advancement in commercial aviation history. Peterson continued. Marcus nodded acknowledgement, though his expression suggested this was never about industry accolades or regulatory success. For him, it had always been about ensuring no one else's child would bleed for the simple act of occupying a space someone decided they didn't belong in. The global adoption has exceeded our initial projections, Peterson added. 42 countries have now implemented similar standards across their transportation networks. Olivia, who had been quietly reviewing the implementation data, looked up. The adaptation to healthcare systems is particularly promising, she noted. Early results show similar patterns of bias detection and prevention in patient processing protocols. This had been her focus during recent months at Harvard, expanding the algorithm beyond aviation to other systems where discriminatory treatment caused harm. The Fair Flight framework had proven remarkably adaptable to different contexts, from healthcare waiting rooms to university admissions processes. Your response to injustice has created more change than 1,000 lawsuits could have, Secretary Peterson observed. By focusing on systematic detection and prevention rather than individual punishment, you've established a model for addressing structural inequality that goes beyond symbolic gestures. Marcus's pride in his daughter was evident, though characteristically understated. Olivia recognized from the beginning that this was never about one incident or one airline. It was about making visible what had been normalized across entire industries. The meeting continued with discussion of next steps, further refinement of the algorithm, expansion to additional sectors, international standardization efforts. But beneath the technical details and policy considerations lay a more fundamental transformation, one measured not in statistics or regulations, but in human dignity preserved. As Secretary Peterson prepared to depart for his next meeting, he paused to make an announcement. The Department of Transportation is establishing an annual award for innovations that advance equity in transportation systems. With your permission, we'd like to name it after Olivia. The Jackson Innovation Award would recognize technological solutions that address discriminatory patterns in how people move through the world, whether by air, rail, sea, or road. The first recipients would be announced at a ceremony the following month. After Peterson departed, father and daughter remained in the office, the weight of the year's journey settling between them. Mom would be proud, Olivia said quietly, touching the pilot wings pinned to her blazer. Beyond proud, though, Marcus agreed. You've accomplished what she always fought for, systematic change rather than individual accommodation. Through the large windows, they could see aircraft taking off and landing at the nearby airport, each flight operating under standards that now bore their family name. The Jackson standards had become more than regulations. They had become a philosophy of operation, a commitment to dignity that transformed how millions experienced travel. Olivia's phone chimed with a message from her research partner at Harvard. Preliminary data from the healthcare adaptation showing promising results in emergency room triage protocols. Another system where biased assumptions had caused harm was being transformed through visibility and accountability. As they prepared to leave the office, Marcus paused by a framed photograph on the wall. Diana Jackson in her captain's uniform, standing proudly beside the aircraft she commanded. Her determined expression seemed to speak across time, connecting three generations of a family that had each contributed to transforming an industry that had not always welcomed them. She broke barriers by flying planes, Marcus said softly, echoing Olivia's words from months earlier. You break barriers by changing the systems that determine who gets to fly them and how they're treated when they do. The scars on Olivia's wrists had faded to thin white lines barely visible unless you knew to look for them. But their impact continued expanding, reshaping systems far beyond the terminal where handcuffs had once cut into her flesh. As they walked toward the elevator, Olivia reflected on the strange journey of the past year, how trauma had been transformed into innovation, how public humiliation had catalyzed institutional change, how bleeding wrists had made visible what had long been hidden in plain sight. The Jackson standards weren't perfect. No system designed by humans ever could be. But they represented a fundamental reimagining of how dignity could be protected through visibility, accountability, and continuous improvement. They ensured that assumptions about who belonged where were subjected to objective measurement rather than subjective enforcement. 1 year after handcuffs had cut into her wrists, Olivia Jackson had helped create a world where belonging wasn't determined by appearance, where dignity was recognized as every person's right rather than a privilege selectively granted. The scars would always remain, telling the story of what had happened, but they no longer determined what was possible. If you've ever been dismissed, questioned, or humiliated simply because of how you look, this story is for you. It's a reminder that dignity isn't a privilege reserved for some, it's a fundamental right that belongs to every single person. When Olivia Jackson boarded that flight 1 year ago, she couldn't have known that handcuffs cutting into her wrists would become the catalyst for industry-wide transformation. She couldn't have anticipated that her personal humiliation would make visible what had long been normalized in transportation systems across America. She couldn't have foreseen that her bleeding would lead to healing for countless others who had suffered similar indignities without cameras to record their experiences. What makes Olivia's story powerful isn't just what happened to her, it's what she chose to do with it. Instead of channeling her trauma into rage or her pain into vengeance, she transformed it into innovation. She recognized that the handcuffs around her wrists were merely physical manifestations of invisible systems that had constrained people who looked like her for generations. The bleeding handcuffs became visible evidence of invisible bias impossible to dismiss, impossible to ignore, impossible to explain away. They forced a reckoning that was long overdue, not just in one airline, but across an entire industry. But visibility alone doesn't create change. It takes courage to demand accountability, intelligence to design solutions, and persistence to implement them systematically. It takes the quiet dignity that Olivia maintained even as blood dripped from her wrists, the composed determination that refused to accept that injustice was simply the cost of existing while Black in America. Every day, each of us faces moments where we can choose dignity over prejudice, inclusion over exclusion, growth over comfort. The question isn't whether you'll face these moments, you will. The question is what you'll choose when they arrive. Will you be someone who reinforces biased systems by looking away when they harm others? Or will you be someone who helps transform those systems by making their impact visible and demanding accountability? Will you measure others' worth by your assumptions about where they belong? Or will you recognize that belonging isn't determined by appearance but by our shared humanity? The Jackson standards didn't just change how airlines operate. They changed how millions of people experience travel moving through the world with the dignity they always deserved but too often were denied. They proved that systems built on bias can be rebuilt on equity when we have the courage to acknowledge their flaws and the determination to address them systematically. Olivia's scars have faded to thin white lines, but their impact continues expanding, transforming not just aviation, but healthcare, education, housing, and beyond. What began as one teenager bleeding in handcuffs has evolved into a movement for dignity that transcends any single industry. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't loud protest or legal action, though both have their place in the struggle for equality. Sometimes the most transformative response is the quiet, persistent work of building something better, creating systems that protect dignity by design rather than leaving it vulnerable to individual discretion. Our world changes when brave individuals stand up and refuse to accept injustice as normal. It changes when trauma becomes not just a source of pain, but a catalyst for innovation. It changes when we recognize that dignity isn't something that can be granted or withheld based on appearance. It's something we all possess inherently by virtue of our humanity. The next time you board a flight, check into a hospital, apply for housing, or navigate any system where bias might influence how you're treated, remember Olivia Jackson and the bleeding handcuffs that transformed an industry. Remember that dignity is your right, not a privilege. And remember that systems can change when we have the courage to make their failures visible and the determination to rebuild them with equity at their core. YouTube engagement elements. If you believe in equal treatment for all, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear that their dignity matters. Your voice adds strength to the movement for systems that respect everyone's inherent worth, regardless of appearance. Have you witnessed or experienced similar treatment while traveling or navigating other systems? Your story matters in this ongoing conversation about dignity and justice. Share your experiences in the comments below. Your voice could help others recognize and respond to similar situations. Sharp-eyed viewers might have noticed a critical detail at the 2:37 mark, the moment Officer Wilson deliberately deactivated his body camera before increasing the tightness of Olivia's handcuffs. This pattern of equipment malfunctions during discriminatory incidents was later discovered across multiple security personnel. Did you catch this subtle but significant moment? Comment below if you spotted it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire change and remind us of our shared humanity. Next week, we'll explore how the Fair Flight algorithm is being adapted for healthcare settings, reducing discriminatory patterns in emergency room triage protocols. Remember, sometimes the quietest responses to injustice create the loudest change. Together, we can build a world where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve, not because of how they look, but because dignity is every person's birthright.